Chapter 566. 10 Days. Lu Jian took a deep breath when he heard the answer. He knew that 10 days of reinforcements was the best they could hope for. However, as the platoon leader and the only officer here, he forced a smile on his face. It's only 10 days, no problem. We can definitely hold on because we are the most elite cold vanguard. Yes, it's only 10 days, we can definitely hold on. The soldiers were also filled with confidence because of the platoon leader's aura. Only Songjia, who was still reloading, had a red face. Would the sixth young master really be able to bring reinforcements in 10 days? On the other side of the commercial street, General Cici was also sitting on a large chair prepared for him by his personal guards. The casualty statistics had just been sent in. In just one day of attacks, the number of casualties had reached 13,000. When he saw the results, he couldn't believe it. If he were to continue fighting like this, wouldn't his 70,000 soldiers only be able to hold on for 5 to 6 days before they would all be buried here? Of course, this wasn't correct. After all, it was the first day of attacks. The enemy's muskets could unleash their full power. If he continued to attack with fatigue, even if his body was made of iron, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. Needless to say, muskets required bullets. If they continued to shoot, would the enemy have enough bullets? Since they had already come this far, there was no reason to retreat now. If they did, all their previous efforts would be wasted. Ceci forced himself to calm down and said to the captains beside him, "Pass down the order. Send a small group of soldiers to continue the harassment strategy. The rest of the soldiers should take advantage of the time to rest. When the sun rises tomorrow, we will attack again. No matter what, we must take down this place by tomorrow morning." It was only a commercial street 3 miles away. Ceci was already prepared to cover the ground with corpses. He didn't believe that they wouldn't be able to take down this place by then. He had an absolute advantage in numbers. His soldiers could get a good rest. Even if he had to exhaust them, he would exhaust the 3,000 mercenaries to death. That night, gunshots were constantly heard. In such an environment, it was naturally difficult for the mercenaries to get a good rest, especially when the enemy would suddenly launch an attack when they wanted to rest. There were 2 times when the enemy almost rushed in. At dawn the next day, the enemy launched another fierce attack. 10,000 men and horses were gathered on both the north and south roads. It looked like they were going to charge into the business district at once. In order to deal with such a huge attack, the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers sacrificed another 500 men to stabilize the situation. When the battle once again reached the night of the same day, almost all of the original 8 battalions were injured, and only 3 battalions were still able to fight. Even the Cold Vanguard platoon on the watchtower lost 3 soldiers. They were all injured by stray arrows. After all, when 100 arrows were fired at the same time, there would always be a few that would enter the watchtower through the window. Even platoon leader Lu Jian's left arm was hit by an arrow. The bodies of the 3 fallen comrades were carried to the side, leaving the other Cold Vanguard soldiers with endless fighting spirit instead of sorrow. They were all prepared to die for a noble cause. That night, when Songjia came to deliver dinner, they all wrote their wills. After all, they did not know when the reinforcements would arrive. Looking at the current situation, not to mention 10 days, they might not even be able to defend for a day or 2. Don't worry, I will arrange for these wills to be kept safe. They will definitely be delivered to the 6th young master. If you die in battle, it will not be in vain. Your families will be taken care of by us, and your revenge will be taken by us. Songjia kept the wills in his arms as he spoke with tears in his eyes. After a day of attack, the Allied forces also suffered heavy losses. Another 10,000 men were lost. Fortunately, they could see that the mercenaries were at the end of their rope. Cici began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. At that time, he would launch the final attack. By tomorrow at this time, they would definitely be able to take down the business district and occupy the entire Haniai city. They would be able to announce their victory to the world. The torrent of bicycles continued to move forward in the darkness. Every bicycle had a glowing flashlight tied to the front. At this moment, they were under the leadership of Yang Qindong, and were rushing towards Haniai city. The ones riding at the front were Yang Qindong and his men. The 6th young master, who was usually calm and collected, did not say a word at this moment. He focused all his strength on his legs. Fortunately, the quality of these bicycles was very good. Every one of them was man-made. Every small part was polished many times before being used. They would definitely not drop the chain at a critical moment. Once one learned how to ride such a thing, one could control it with one hand. They even ate while riding. Other than 2 hours of rest and 15 minutes for toilet breaks and recovery, they were basically always on the road. Knowing that the situation in Hanei City would not be good, under the leadership of Yang Chendong, a group of cold warriors rode from noon yesterday to the next day. They rode for more than 800 miles in 30 hours. Excluding the time for rest and sleep, their average speed was more than 25 kilometers per hour. Finally, they arrived at the outskirts of Hanei City in the middle of the night. It was here that they could see flashes of fire from time to time from afar. Needless to say, that must be the center of the battlefield. Young master, let's do it. Tiger's Mane's eyes were fixed on the city. His fists were clenched tightly. It was obvious that he was furious at the moment. The 2nd Regiment's cold vanguard warriors were also quickly gathering. The various battalions, companies, and platoons were checking their numbers and equipment. Although they were tired from the journey, they were still prepared to fight as soon as the order was given. Yang Chendong, whose eyes were shining from time to time, nodded. The earlier they entered the city, the less pressure Song Zhe and the others would face. However, the choice of how to attack the city was also very important. Although attacking now was indeed unexpected, he did not want to scare the enemy away. He wanted all of them to stay here. Therefore, he needed to plan carefully. Direct company, stay behind. The rest of the soldiers should take the time to rest. 3rd Commander Wu Sheng strode over and stood at attention beside Yang Chendong. Direct Company Commander Wu Sheng reporting for duty. Why? Are you afraid that there won't be a battle to fight? Yang Chendong did not know what to say when he saw the dignified regiment commander taking on the responsibility of a company commander. Hee, isn't it more enjoyable to fight with the 6th young master? Wu Sheng blushed and smiled. This was snatching military merit in front of the 6th young master. He wouldn't be unhappy, right? Yang Chendong obviously knew what kind of people these officers were, especially people like Wu Sheng. It was as if he was born to fight. Once there was a battle, he would even forget about his wife and children. When it came to a big battle, he would immediately become the commander of the assault force. If you did not let him participate in the battle, it would be painful for him. Not wanting to dampen the enthusiasm of the officers, Yang Chendong did not refuse. Instead, he said, since you want to be the vanguard, why don't we make a bet? You take your direct company, and I'll take the 1st and 2nd Guard squad. Let's see who can take down the city gate first. Although the 1st and 2nd Guard squads had been expanded after the battle, they only had 60 people in total. The direct company of the regiment had 100 people. Wu Sheng could not help but show a strong fighting spirit. Okay, then let's compete. But 6th young master, what if we win? Seeing how confident Wu Sheng was, Yang Chendong smiled. Hanoi City has a total of 4 city gates. If you want to beat me, you'll have to take down at least 3. Are you confident you can do it? Wu Sheng was taken aback by this rhetorical question. He didn't know how to answer. On the other hand, Yang Chendong waved his hand casually. All right, if you can beat my guards, I'll give you 3 more machine guns later. Even for the Cold Front Regiment, each company only had 1 machine gun. If they had the chance to get 3 more, it would be equivalent to a lot of fighting power. Wu Sheng was very happy. Then 6th young master, it's a deal. Normally, they would not dare to talk to Yang Chendong like this. However, this was the battlefield, and they had the heart to compete. Naturally, they could be more casual. Guards, follow me. Yang Chendong was already a little impatient. After making a bet with Wu Sheng, he led 60 guards straight to the south gate. Yang Chendong chose to break through the south gate first. Wu Sheng began to order his direct company to choose the west gate. This was a competition with the 6th young master. Even if they could not win, they could not lose too badly. On the south gate, there were soldiers patrolling with torches from time to time. When Yang Chendong led the guards to the bottom of the city, they could even hear the voices of the Lansang Kingdom soldiers on the tower. Obviously, their defense was very lax. No one would have thought that an enemy would appear at this time. Prepare the triangle anchor. Yang Chendong raised his head and glanced at the 10-meter-tall city gate tower. A look of disdain flashed across his eyes. With the anger in his heart, and with the help of some other items, climbing up the tower was just a matter of a blink of an eye. Usually they were responsible for the safety of the 6th young master. Now that they finally had a chance to show off their skills, the 60 guards of the 2 small teams were very excited. Everyone wanted to be the first to show off. In the end, the 10 guards who had the best performance in climbing were quickly selected and became the first batch to climb the city. Chapter 567. Give me one. Yang Chendong reached out and took a triangular anchor from Chiovi's hand. He weighed it in his hand. Young master, you can't take the risk. While Chiovi was still in a daze, Tiger's Mane strode over and tried to stop Yang Chendong. After all, no one thought that the 6th young master would personally take action. What? Are you looking down on me? Yang Chendong tied one end of the rope to his waist and casually glanced at Tiger's Mane. However, it was this calm attitude that shocked Tiger's Mane. He had been with the young master for too long. No one knew better than him what his words and actions represented. Sometimes, the calmer he appeared, the more it proved that he was really angry. Tiger's Mane didn't dare to say anything. Chiovi didn't know about this. He stepped forward and said, 6th young master, you can't go to the front line as a member of the assault team. As he said that, he tried to untie the rope that was already tied to his waist. A strong force suddenly hit Chiovi's shoulder. He couldn't help but take a few steps back and almost fell to the ground. This also made his eyes reveal a horrifying expression. When training became a habit, even standing there would be rooted to the ground. As the captain of the 1st guard team, Chiovi was naturally skilled. However, the 6th young master only casually bumped into him, and he almost fell to the ground. It wasn't that his lower body was unstable, it was just that the 6th young master was too strong. After showing his position in action, Yang Chendong looked at the other guards who still wanted to persuade him and said, if any of you can beat me in a one-on-one, then you can stop me. Otherwise, don't say anything. What kind of joke was this? The entire 1st guard squad wasn't a match for Yang Chendong even if they joined forces. Yet he still dared to challenge him to a duel. Based on this sentence alone, everyone fell silent. Beta Persei, who hadn't reacted until now, lowered his voice and grabbed a triangular anchor. He wanted to show his support with practical actions. He wanted to be in the first echelon with the young master. After Tiger's Mane reacted, he grabbed the triangular anchor to show his determination. Okay, you're so heavy. Aren't you afraid that the rope can't hold you? If you want to go up, you'd better be in the 2nd echelon. Other than Beta Persei being too heavy and not suitable for this kind of flexible work, the captain of the 1st squad, Chiovi, the captain of the 2nd squad, Dao Xiao, and several vice-captains and squad leaders grabbed the triangular anchor respectively. They wanted to show their determination to support the 6th young master with practical actions. Very well, hurry up. I hope you won't be a burden to me. After making a joke, Yang Chendong began to exert his strength. With a wave of his hand, the triangular anchor in his hand flew toward the top of the city wall as if it had grown eyes. Soon it was stuck at the junction of the battlements. He pulled hard on a climbing rope. After making sure that it was secure, he stretched out his feet and stepped on the battlements. His arms continued to exert strength, and his feet moved quickly. His whole body flew straight up the battlements like a monkey. So fast. Although they were mentally prepared, when they saw Yang Chendong's figure quickly disappear in front of them, the guards couldn't help but let out a sigh. What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Tiger's Mane also looked at the battlements with everyone's gaze, but he quickly remembered his mission and threw the triangular anchor up the battlements. For a moment, the triangular anchors flew up rapidly as if they had grown eyes. Yang Chendong was the first to climb up the battlements with the help of the climbing rope. His speed was as fast as a fox, making it difficult for people to catch his speed. After jumping up the southern battlements, he flew toward a dark corner. His appearance didn't attract anyone's attention. He took a deep breath and calmed his breathing. His hand reached for his waist and a military knife appeared in his hand. Soon after, his figure flew out like a swallow in the clouds. His footsteps were extremely fast as he rushed towards a Lansong soldier, who was walking around with a torch in his hand. His feet didn't make the slightest sound as he stepped on the ground. At this moment, he was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. When he arrived behind the enemy soldier, he still didn't raise the enemy's guard. He raised his right arm and quietly placed the stiletto on the soldier's neck. His left hand covered the soldier's mouth and pulled back, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Ugh! He instinctively wanted to struggle, but how could he be Yang Chendong's opponent? This Zhonglan Kingdom soldier's legs only forcefully kicked twice before his aura became weaker and weaker. After a breath of time, his head tilted to the side, announcing his death. After killing the nearest enemy, Yang Chendong reached out and took the torch from the other party. He stood up fearlessly and began to patrol the area just like the soldier before. However, his eyes continued to flicker as he imprinted the situation of the enemies in his mind. Then he began to analyze and make judgments. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Tiger's Mane and the others also climbed up the tower and came to a dark corner beside Yang Chendong. Without turning his head, Yang Chendong's left hand, which was behind his back, constantly made hand gestures, telling Tiger's Mane and the others the exact location and number of enemies. You guys go to the left, you guys go to the right. The rest of you follow me. After Tiger Meng saw Yang Chendong's hand gesture clearly, he continued to make arrangements. One by one, the guards who had climbed up the tower began to disperse, each of them searching for their own targets. The Lansong soldiers were completely unprepared. They didn't think that someone would ambush them. They were still walking around the tower. Occasionally, they would stop and chat to pass the time. In the face of such unprepared opponents, the guards were like dragons that were born. With the stabbing of their bayonets, the enemies were silently killed one by one. Every time one of them died, the torch in their hands would be replaced by another guard. In less than half an hour, almost 50 enemies on the south gate were all killed. From the beginning to the end, not a single sound was made. It was obvious how strong the guards were. Young master, we have them under control. Tiger's Mane broke the neck of the last enemy in his hands and walked to Yang Chendong's side. Okay, leave one squad here to guard. Let them open the south gate and send more troops in. The rest of you, follow me to the east gate tower. Yang Chendong said calmly as if they had just killed a few stray dogs and not a few dozen human lives. Everyone held their torches and walked from the southern gate tower to the eastern gate tower in an open manner. Walking at the front was Yang Chendong. Taking someone by surprise would often lead to unexpected results. Perhaps no one would have thought that a person who launched a sneak attack would dare to appear so brazenly. Yang Chendong grasped this mentality. Once he got close to the enemies, they wouldn't have time to react. Why are those people coming from the south gate tower to us? What are they doing? A group of dozens of people holding torches was quickly approaching. Finally, they attracted the attention of the guards on the east gate tower. However, they were only paying attention. Everyone was just curious. No one thought that they were enemies. 30 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters. The distance was getting closer and closer. With the help of the light from the torches, the faces of both sides could be seen clearly. The guards also held their bayonets tightly and were ready to attack at any time. However, at this moment, a gunshot suddenly came from the west gate tower. A ray of light appeared. In this dark night, it was so eye-catching and so clear. When the gunshot rang out, Yang Chendong knew that something was wrong. Wuxia's whereabouts must have been discovered and they had no choice but to use their guns. Since they were already discovered, there was no need to hide anymore. Yang Chendong fiercely threw the torch forward and immediately put away the military knife. Instead, he took out the Type 95 submachine gun that he carried on his back. Da-da-da-da-da. Without giving the enemies any time to react, Yang Chendong raised his gun and fired. Relying on his sharp senses and proficiency with firearms, every time a bullet was fired, an enemy holding a torch would fall to the ground. Attack! Behind him, Hu Meng and the others were only half a beat slower before they raised their guns and fired. Instantly, gunshots rang out, and the enemies in front of them were all annihilated in less than 3 breaths of time. Go to the North Gate Tower. Yang Chendong raised his left hand and made a forward motion. Then he took the lead and rushed out. In terms of elite level, these guards who spent every day with the 6th young master were constantly trained. Especially with Yang Chendong's personal strength getting stronger and stronger, they were not willing to continue being punching bags. As the saying goes, the greater the pressure, the greater the resistance. The guards would train whenever they had time and strive to break through their personal limits. Leading such a team was really successful. On the North Gate Tower, there were only bursts of gunshots. There were no casualties and dozens of enemies were killed on the ground. Wu Sheng and the company under his direct command had just finished off the enemies on the West Gate Tower. The enemies on the South, East, and North Gate Towers were all wiped out. Close the 4 cities. Don't let the enemies escape. Yang Chendong, who gave the order, had a cold expression on his face. It was obvious that he was really angry at this moment. After the order was given, the 3 regiments of Cold Vanguard outside the city were divided into 4 groups. They guarded the 4 city gates respectively. Then they began to push from the outside to the inside. The 3 of them formed a group. Under the 3-on-3 tactic, the unprepared enemies fell to the ground one after another. Many of them did not understand what had happened until the moment they died. How could there be enemies behind them? The news that the 4 city gates leading to the outside world had fallen quickly reached the ears of the commanding general, Ceci. Chapter 568. That's impossible. After hearing the news, Saisha, who had just fallen asleep, immediately sat up on the bed and wiped his face forcefully. Obviously, he wanted to see if he was still dreaming. Perhaps he rubbed his nose too hard, but Saisha had no choice but to face the reality. How many enemies are there? Have you figured it out? General, there are a lot of enemies. Their firepower is very strong. Our brothers couldn't stop them at all, the captain who came to report said with a sad face. How can there be so many enemies? We have only been in Hanoi for 3 days. Even if there are reinforcements, they couldn't have arrived so quickly. Also, didn't you say that not even a bird flew out when the city was surrounded? How did the news get out? Saisha's face was full of doubt and confusion. Seeing that Saisha was still thinking about these things, the captain said anxiously, General, now is not the time to look into these things. You should decide what to do next. Should we take advantage of the fact that the enemy hasn't formed a favorable encirclement and kill our way out? It was no wonder that the captain was so timid. Previously, when they said that they were going to be enemies with the mercenaries, their hearts were beating like drums. It was only when they really entered Hanoi City and suppressed the mercenaries that they could finally relax. Especially when they knew that the number of mercenaries that were surrounded was very small, and they didn't have many elites. They really did have the idea of eliminating the mercenaries. But now, the main force of the mercenaries had appeared. From the short battle, there was no doubt that they were the elites of the elites. In the first 3 days of fighting, they had lost nearly 30,000 soldiers. Now that they had to face the main force of the mercenaries, how could they not be afraid? The captain's face was full of fear. When Saisha saw it, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. This time, he came to Hanoi with the intention of making a name for himself. Now that his army had suffered such heavy losses, if he still couldn't conquer this place, even if he managed to escape, wouldn't he be laughed at by others? No, we can't retreat. There aren't many enemies left in the commercial street. We must rush in. As long as we occupy that place, we can obtain countless gold and silver, and even advanced firearms. That way we will have a foothold. As long as we can defend the place, the news will spread quickly, and reinforcements will arrive. When that time comes, we can attack from both sides. No matter how strong the mercenaries are, they won't be able to defend themselves. That will be the time for us to make a great contribution. As expected of a ruthless general, not only did he not run away in the face of Lung Feng's attack, he even chose to fight to the death. This seemed to have inspired the major commander, who also saw some hope. General, can we really do it? Why not? We still have more than 40,000 people. Even if we discount them, we still have 20,000 people left. Can't we defend the business district? At that time, we will also have the firearms of the mercenaries. What will we be afraid of? Cece said viciously. He then walked out of his bed and called for a group of guards to carry out a new plan of attack. On the watchtower, Lu Jian was sleeping with a Type 95 class machine gun. He needed to rest up and prepare for the battle at dawn. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire from afar woke him up. He took out his binoculars and looked into the distance. His face lit up. It's the reinforcements. The reinforcements have arrived. Really? Governor Songjia, who also heard the gunshots, rushed to the top of the building just in time to hear this sentence. That's right. The reinforcements must have arrived. But I don't know if they are the main force of the 6th Young Master's Lung Feng. Lu Jian said with uncertainty. After all, it had only been 2 days since the telegram was sent. How could they arrive so quickly? Speaking of which, if the telegram wasn't out of power, they would have received the telegram from Yang Qindong. No matter who they are, as long as they are reinforcements, they are our hope. But we still have to prepare for the worst and prevent the enemy from launching a fierce attack. Songjia couldn't be sure that the reinforcements were the main force of the 6th Young Master and the Lung Feng. But no matter what, there was still hope. Just as Songjia finished speaking, one of the Lung Feng soldiers said, "The enemy is gathering. It looks like they are really going to launch a fierce attack." Songjia and Lu Jian heard this and came to the window. They looked down and saw the soldiers of the Lansong Kingdom gathering. The two of them looked at each other in silence. Their expressions didn't look too good. But some things were already here. It was useless to be afraid. Songjia said to Lu Jian, "Platoon leader Lu, I will have to trouble you. Please try your best to stop the enemy. I will go down and inform the other units to prepare for a full counterattack." "Thank you, Governor Song." Looking at Songjia's bloodshot eyes, Lu Jian felt sorry for him. He hadn't slept for 3 days. The auxiliary soldiers, temporary auxiliary soldiers, and the Vietnamese mercenaries in the commercial street were all mobilized. More than 5,000 people gathered together. This was their last force. Victory or defeat depended on this. Just as the street was ready, the Lansong Kingdom's soldiers sounded the attack horn. In the dark night, countless enemies rushed over with swords, spears, and clubs. Perhaps they knew that this was their last hope. The speed of these soldiers was faster than before. Attack, don't be afraid of wasting bullets. Attack with all your might. On the watchtower, Lu Jian held the 12.7mm heavy machine gun and kept pulling the trigger. Bullets flew out rapidly. The shells that came out of the chamber quickly formed a layer on the ground. Beside him, a few of the Lung Feng soldiers also worked together and used their machine guns to sweep the ground. At the same time, the Lansong Kingdom soldiers also fell to the ground. After 3 days of continuous fighting, the number of iron shields in the enemy's hands was very low. It was difficult for them to block the bullets of the machine guns. However, the Lung Feng soldiers were too few in number. In the end, many of the soldiers still managed to rush into the commercial street. Attack! The auxiliary soldiers hidden in various places held Type 81 rifles and spat out tongues of fire. The first enemy soldiers who rushed and were turned into corpses. However, the enemy's numbers were too many. No matter how hard they fought, they couldn't break through. In the end, the enemy soldiers rushed in just like that. "Brothers, follow me and kill." With a loud shout, he took the lead and charged out with his blade. Behind him, there were thousands of soldiers and Vietnamese mercenaries, and they let out loud shouts as they clashed with the soldiers of the Lansong Kingdom, unfolding the cruelest and most cold-blooded hand-to-hand combat. Scythes clanged, swords hacked, spears stabbed, axes and hooks hacked. Soon, the place became a purgatory. Blood, broken limbs, and corpses were everywhere. The Lung Feng 3rd Regiment was like a ferocious tiger rushing down the mountain from the city gate towards the center of Hanoi City. Following them were tens of thousands of educated youths from Chichien City. Of the 50,000 youths who were sent here at the beginning, there were only about 10,000 of them left in Hanoi City. When the battle broke out, they tried their best to hide. Although they were unarmed and wanted to kill the enemy and serve their country, they knew their mission and responsibility. Without a plan, They would only be courting death if they rushed out. When the Cold Vanguard Regiment appeared, they quickly gathered together and followed behind the Cold Vanguard Regiment. They took all kinds of weapons from the dead enemy soldiers and charged towards the commercial street with the Cold Vanguard Regiment. At the front of the charging army, Yang Chendong took the lead. Every time he fired a shot with the 95 style, an enemy would fall to the ground. With the existence of that chi, his perception was at least 3 times stronger than that of an ordinary person. These advantages made him like a fish in water. In just a short while, the number of enemies who had died at his hands had exceeded 100. Young master, slow down. Young master, be careful. Tiger's Mane followed behind Yang Chendong with 2 guards. A gentleman would not stand under a collapsing wall. Logically speaking, Yang Chendong should not be allowed to participate in such a chaotic battle. However, none of them could catch up to the 6th young master. All they could do was follow closely behind and strangle all dangers in the cradle. This slowly turned them into a sharp knife, stabbing directly into the enemy's heart. Behind them was the main force of the Lungfeng 3rd Regiment. Commander Wu Sheng was already sweating profusely. Previously, when they were attacking the city, they were accidentally discovered by the enemy and had no choice but to take the initiative to fire. Even so, they only managed to take down the west gate of the 4 city gates. The battle for the city gates was already over. This made Commander Wu Sheng very depressed. However, they were still left in the dust by the 6th young master in the battle inside the city. As a self-proclaimed elite, he could not accept this. He yelled and urged the Cold Spear warriors to speed up, turning into a torrent that charged straight into the city center. Whether it was Yang Chendong's troops or the 2nd Regiment of the Lungfeng, they were all too fast. They were so fast that the Lansong Kingdom's soldiers did not even have time to form an effective defensive line before they killed their way over. Then they broke their formation and forced countless enemies to flee. Those who were too slow to run simply threw down their weapons and knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong passed by the spineless and kneeling surrendered soldiers and continued to lead the charge towards the commercial street near the palace. Behind Yang Chendong were a few dozen guards. Although they tried their best, they realized that they were getting further and further away from the 6th young master. Behind the guards was the 3rd Regiment of the Lungfeng led by Commander Wu Sheng. In comparison, although they tried their best, they were still at least 300 to 400 meters away from the guards. Behind them were the educated youths from Qiqian City. At this moment, they finally had a chance to use their skills. The work of reorganizing the kneeling captives would be done by them. Chapter 569. The gunshots never stopped from night till dawn. When a white light slowly rose from the horizon, Yang Chendong was already 1 kilometer away from the commercial street. It was obvious that there was a group of people shouting here. After dodging to a corner, Yang Chendong took a deep breath. Then he loaded a new magazine with the Type 95 in his hand. He couldn't remember how much ammunition he took out from the warehouse. Young master. During this pause, Tiger's Mane and the others finally caught up. Then, they leaned against the corner to rest. This night, they had been killing enemies and chasing after the 6th young master. They didn't feel anything before, but now that they had a chance to rest, the fatigue immediately filled their bodies. How is it? Very tired, right? Bear with it, the battle will be over soon. Yang Chendong's gaze swept over the team members and revealed a smile. Yang Chendong had been charging at the front line all this time. He should be far more tired than the others. In particular, his perception had always been in a very tense state. Because of the existence of the key, he felt tired, but it wasn't that strong. On the contrary, he could feel that the key was stronger than before, and even faintly felt that it was getting bigger. This made Yang Chendong very curious. He wanted to know if there was a limit to this key, and where the limit was. The other team members didn't know what the 6th young master was thinking. After receiving encouragement, everyone's fatigue suddenly decreased by half. Each of them puffed out their chests, showing that they could still fight. Okay, check your weapons and equipment, and prepare for a surprise attack. Yang Chendong's eyes were smiling. It was as if they weren't going to kill people, but to have fun. After fighting for a night, the team members didn't have many bullets left. They weren't like Yang Chendong, who owned a large warehouse and had the world's largest arsenal behind him. But the remaining bullets were no problem for a round of attack. All right, let's count to 5 and charge together. Seeing that all the soldiers were looking at him with inquiring eyes after checking their weapons, Yang Chendong suddenly said with a heroic spirit, 5, 4, 3, 2, charge. When Yang Chendong counted to 2, his figure had already stood up. With the word charge, he was the first to appear on the main street. Then, the 95 style in his hand spewed out a tongue of flame, directly killing the enemies on the street behind him. This enemy troop was General Sexi's headquarters. He was reprimanding the captains and kiliarchs under his command as the battle was going badly. Who would have thought that an enemy would suddenly appear behind him? Da-da-da. Gunshots rang out one after another, and the unprepared Lansong soldiers fell to the ground like sliced chives. The gunshot attracted Cece's attention. What's going on? Why are there enemies behind us? Where are the troops we arranged to stop the enemy? It was no wonder that Cece was so panicked. At the beginning of the battle, he arranged for 3 kiliarchs and 3,000 soldiers to guard behind him. He thought that it was foolproof, but who knew that they were already scared out of their wits by the mercenaries? They either escaped from the city or found a place to hide. Some even surrendered and became captives. They were really frightened by the strength of Yang Chendong and the others. The gunshots didn't stop because of Cece's confusion. On the contrary, it continued. When the distance was close, a group of soldiers threw out the grenades at their waists, causing the ground to rumble. The distance between the two sides was about 200 meters. This was the most effective distance for firearms. On the other hand, the weapons in the hands of the Lansong soldiers were like toys in the hands of children. They were not of any use at all. Hold on. Cece was caught off guard by Lung Feng's sudden appearance. Only when many of the soldiers in his line of sight had fallen to the ground did he react. He loudly gave out orders as he fled to a nearby street under the protection of his personal guards. The mercenaries in the commercial street were getting weaker and weaker after a few rounds of attacks. Originally, 1 or 2 more attacks would have been enough to clinch victory. The sudden appearance of the cold front made Cece's plan fall through. He had no choice but to escape to another place. Want to run? Yang Chendong's eyes spat out flames of anger. With his inhuman eyesight, he naturally saw that there was a general wearing golden armor among the people escaping. If he guessed correctly, he should be the leader of the mercenaries. If he didn't encounter him, it would be fine. But since he encountered him, there was no reason to let him escape. He ran as if he was flying. With a leap, he jumped onto the roof of a house and threw out a sentence to Tiger's Mane behind him. I'll chase after the enemy. You guys are responsible for cleaning up this place. With that, Yang Chendong disappeared from the sight of Tiger's Mane and the others. Everything happened too quickly. In addition to a night of killing, even Tiger's Mane and the others felt a little exhausted. They definitely couldn't keep up with the young master's speed. Chiovi, Dao Xiao, you guys are responsible for settling the matters here. Beta Persei, let's go. Even though he was very tired, Tiger's Mane still decided to chase after him. This was a display of loyalty. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei left. Behind them, a few members of the first guard team followed. Ba Daojiang, Peng Yu and the others were among them. Their thoughts were the same. They absolutely couldn't let the 6th young master take the risk. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that they were physically exhausted, they would have followed behind Yang Chendong. Cece naturally didn't know that he had been targeted. When he left a group of people to guard the place, he thought that he was already safe. So when he walked to another street with nearly 100 of his personal guards, his originally nervous heart had already relaxed. It was early in the morning, and the battle in the commercial street had already lasted for 3 days. The people in the vicinity had already fled. On a relatively spacious street, there was only Cece and nearly 100 of his subordinates. This time we were unlucky. The mercenaries came just in time. But it doesn't matter. After this battle, at least we know that they are not invincible. After I leave the city and regroup, they definitely won't be so lucky the next time they come. Cece's face was unconvinced. It seemed like he was cheering for his subordinates, but it also seemed like he was cheering for himself. While walking, Cece said this. That's right. With the general's divine power, even the mercenaries are no match for you. Immediately, a personal guard flattered him. Ha ha ha. Hearing the flattering words of his subordinates, Cece laughed and completely forgot that he was scared shitless when he saw the mercenaries. This army that didn't look like a failure at all was actually laughing at this time. It looked so discordant. At this moment, an even more discordant voice exploded above their heads. Bah! It's just a group of clowns. How dare they boast so shamelessly? Who is it? Who is it? Where is he? As soon as they heard the reprimanding voice, Cece and the others quickly looked over and saw Yang Chendong standing on a 5-meter-high roof. Of course, they didn't know who Yang Chendong was, but they could see that the opponent was only one person. Although this person was holding a firearm that they had never seen before, 100 people against one person still gave them enough courage. You're only one person and you still dare to show your face. You really don't know how to write the word death. Come, let's attack together. Cece's eyes flashed with a fierce light. His gaze was more focused on the firearm in Yang Chendong's hand. He thought that this battle was already over, but if he could snatch an advanced firearm, then this trip would be worth it. The fact that 100 people could fight one person gave the other personal guards a great deal of confidence. After receiving the general's order, they clamored and surrounded the rooftop. You don't know the meaning of death. Yang Chendong stood on the rooftop like a god, looking at these people with swords and spears who wanted to surround him. His eyes flashed with a strong murderous intent. Then he raised the gun and fired at a few personal guards who were climbing up the rooftop. Bang! A loud sound was heard, followed by the sound of a small landmine explosion. The pitiful personal guards who were climbing up the rooftop didn't even know what was going on before they were blown away. The personal guard who was hit by the gun was directly blown into pieces. His flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Yang Chendong was holding a shotgun in his hand, and it was the latest model. The power of a small cannonball was not just for show. When this shot was fired, the range of the shot encompassed a radius of 4 to 5 meters. How could swords and spears block this shot? One shot actually had such a shocking effect. Cece's mouth suddenly opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. It could be seen how shocked he was at this moment. The other personal guards weren't any better. A few personal guards who wanted to climb up the rooftop in another direction suddenly stopped their actions. Then they stood there helplessly, not knowing what to do. They didn't know what to do, but Yang Chendong could teach them. They saw the muzzle of the gun turn, and the next shot was already in front of them. Bang! A large hole appeared on the rooftop. Naturally, no one who stood there was lucky enough to escape. If they weren't dead, then they were injured. Oh my God! The power of the shotgun scared them. After seeing the power of 2 shots, none of the personal guards thought of taking Yang Chendong's life. On the contrary, each of them quickly found a place to hide. At this moment, Yang Chendong, who was alone, was not a soft persimmon to be pinched. He was like a fierce tiger in the forest, opening his mouth and swallowing their lives. Chapter 570. Pung pung pung. Shot after shot, hitting the bodyguards who were running in all directions. One bodyguard after another fell to the ground, screaming and wailing, giving people a feeling of fear. What kind of weapon is this? Saishi rushed into a house under the protection of a few bodyguards. At this time he was in a very sorry state, his face full of fear. Just now, he had seen with his own eyes that 3 personal guards were hiding behind a thick wooden plank. However, when the gunshot rang out, a large hole was blasted in the wooden plank. The 3 people who were hiding were also blasted 3 to 4 meters away. This kind of powerful lethality completely defeated his arrogance. At this time, he only had one feeling, and that was to quickly escape from here. Otherwise, he really didn't know where he would be safe at this time. Pung pung pung. The sound of gunshots and explosions were endless, one after another. After the first explosion, there were always a few screams, which meant that more bodyguards were shot and died, or were seriously injured and lost the ability to fight. General, what do we do? A guard asked Cece with a pale face. His trembling legs represented his fear and nervousness at this moment. Think of a way to rush out, after all, he is only one person. She was also frightened, but after all, he was a general, so he was able to quickly calm down. It was just that he was already very restrained, and no longer wanted to take Yang Qindong's life like before. The advanced firearms were already a headache, and this could be seen from the daily battle casualties that reached almost 10,000. Not to mention the cannons, the difference of one word meant that it was indeed an existence that could not be surpassed. Just in terms of momentum, the shotgun was already far superior to the 81 rifle and the 95 style. Let's split up and rush out. Shi forced himself to calm down and tried to make his voice sound calm, then pointed at the 3 bodyguards beside him. You 3 run out in different directions, the others follow me. You have to remember he is only one person, and it is impossible for him to shoot at all of you at the same time. The personal guards were used to obeying the general's orders, especially when they thought that there was only one enemy. If they fled in all directions, their chances of survival should be very high. A few personal guards looked at each other and nodded before rushing out of the house in different directions. Yang Qindong, who had already put away the shotgun, took out a Type 95 5.8mm machine gun from the big warehouse. The gun's empty weight was 3.95 kilograms, 840mm long, 600 shooting range, and was fed by a 75-round drum. Compared to the shotgun that could only hold 6 rounds, this Type 95 machine gun's performance was a bit more powerful. The only difference was that it was not as powerful, but in front of the bodyguards were already scared out of their wits. It was nothing. Just as he reloaded a new magazine, he saw someone rushing out of the house. A cold light flashed in Yang Qindong's eyes. How could he be polite? He shot out a few shots, and the 3 guards who were fleeing in 3 different directions fell to the ground with a plop. Rush out. Shi heard the sound of gunfire outside and knew that his chance was here. He yelled and brought the only 3 bodyguards with him out of the house. But right after he rushed out, he clearly saw the bodyguards' bodies on the street, including the 3 bodyguards who just rushed out. Shi instinctively stopped and looked up at the roof. What he saw was Yang Qindong holding a Type 95 machine gun with a face full of killing intent. 222. After a few shots, the remaining 3 bodyguards fell backwards. If you looked closely, you would see that they were all shot in the forehead. For a machine gun to be able to hit the bullseye, it could be seen that Yang Qindong's familiarity and accuracy with guns had reached a new level. With a putong sound, Shi also knelt on the ground. Different from the other bodyguards, his legs were shot. The powerful penetrating force of the machine gun shattered his leg bones, causing him to lose the ability to stand up. General! Shouts came from the houses on the side of the street. Some bodyguards rushed out as if they didn't care about their lives. Personal guards were indeed personal guards. Their loyalty to the general was many times higher than that of ordinary soldiers. But the reality was that their actions were completely useless. They could only become souls under the gun. 22222. The muzzle of the gun spat out a tongue of fire. Then, the bodyguards fell to the ground one by one. None of them could reach Shi's side. Seeing everything that happened, Shi forgot about the pain in his legs. Because at this moment, his heart was in even more pain. The moment he mustered the courage to look up, he saw Yang Qindong standing on the roof like a devil. He made people feel a deep fear from the bottom of their hearts. The gunshots finally stopped, and the whole street instantly became quiet. None of the bodyguards were alive. The only ones who could breathe were Yang Qindong standing on the roof, and Shi who was trembling on the ground with bleeding knees. Young Master, Tiger's Mane, and the others finally appeared. When they saw Yang Qindong on the roof safe and sound, they couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then they were deeply shocked. They were frightened by the scene in front of them. The street was full of corpses, and there were nearly 100 of them. This was all done by the 6th young master? Badao Jiang said as he couldn't help but gulp. 1 against 100. Although they had the advantage of advanced firearms, it wasn't something they could do. That should be the enemy general who caused trouble for us this time. Capture him, and we'll have a public trial later. Right, bandage him up. We can't let him die so quickly. Jumping down from the roof, Yang Chendong walked to Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. At the same time that Saishi was captured, in front of the commercial street, because of the appearance of the guards and the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, the Lansong soldiers here were first defeated, then kneeled and surrendered in front of the powerful forces. The crisis of Hanoi City was resolved. At the entrance of the commercial street, Yang Chendong stood there and looked at the mess in front of him. On the commercial street after the war, some guns were completely smashed, and machine gun parts were scattered all over the ground. The bodies of the martyrs were in various positions. Some were hugging the enemy's waist, some were hugging the enemy's head, some were choking the enemy's neck, some were pressing the enemy to the ground, and some were burning together with the enemy. There was also a soldier who was still holding a grenade in his hand. His body was covered in brain matter. The brains of the Lansong soldiers who died with him were splattered all over the ground. Another soldier was holding half of the enemy's ear in his mouth. When they buried the bodies of the martyrs, because their hands were interlocked, they hugged the enemy so tightly that some of their fingers were broken. The cruel side of the war was finally revealed. In this battle, a platoon of the Cold Front soldiers had lost 6 people, and more than 10 were injured. Of the 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers, only 1 company was left standing. Of the 6 temporary auxiliary battalions, only 1 battalion survived. Of the 10,000 Vietnamese mercenaries led by Hong Jin, only less than 1,000 were left. This battle was the worst loss the mercenaries had suffered since they set out on the battlefield. Although this sacrifice had eliminated more than 40,000 enemies, this result still made Yang Chendong's heart ache. Standing behind him, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei and the others' eyes were red, and the murderous intent in their hearts had unknowingly gathered. Young master, this hatred must be avenged. Of course it must be avenged. Yang Chendong said with absolute certainty. Not only did the Lansong kingdom take in Fan Yuhai's defeated troops, they even dared to take the initiative to attack them. If he did not destroy them, how could he get rid of the hatred in his heart? Wouldn't that make others look down on him? 6th Young Master. Song Zhe, Gao Yu, Lu Jian and Hong Jin finally appeared. From their bodies, one could see heavy fatigue. It was obvious that the 3 days and 4 nights of fierce battle had consumed a lot of their energy. As soon as the 4 of them appeared, they had a guilty look on their faces. With such a heavy loss this time, they did not know what kind of punishment they would receive. Although they had worked hard in the process, the result was still unbearable. This was especially true for Hong Jin, who was one of the 4. This time, he was the one who allowed the enemy to break in while he was defending the city. What was even more hateful was that there were some traitors among his subordinates. It could be said that he was the most responsible for this incident in Hanoi City. He was originally a defeated general, and this time he committed such a big mistake. He really did not have the face to face Yang Chendong. The reason why he came this time was to ask for forgiveness. He was even mentally prepared to be punished severely, and even to hand over his military power. Yang Chendong stood there motionless like a mountain. His eyes swept across the 4 people's bodies and faces, bringing great pressure to them. Hong Jin's mistake was already mentioned. Gao Yu's mistake was that he did not follow the rules and regulations. As a result, the telegraph was always on. When it was needed, there was not enough power to receive the telegraph. Naturally, it was a big mistake to not be able to receive the news. Although Lu Jian worked hard in the battle, as the highest-ranking officer of Lung Feng, he only cared about the small area in front of him. He did not think about commanding the auxiliary troops, did not help this force, and did not even arrange for them to be on the watchtowers. Otherwise, the battle would not have been so difficult. As for Song Zhe himself, he only focused on developing the economy. He did not think about how to deal with the enemy if they attacked. This was a little short-sighted. He did not even make good use of the 10,000 educated youths in the city. This was also a big mistake. The 4 people who had made mistakes, at this moment, no one dared to look at Yang Chendong. They all lowered their heads, waiting for the result of their punishment. Sigh. With a sigh, Yang Chendong knew that they were wrong. However, this was not what they wanted to face. It was because of their limited vision. He believed that with this experience, they should know how to deal with it in the future. You have worked hard. After sighing, Yang Chendong did not blame them. Instead, he encouraged them to say such a sentence. Chapter 571. They were waiting to be reprimanded, even prepared to be punished severely and transferred from their original posts. Who would have thought that Yang Chendong would say such a thing? What did he mean? Was he praising their efforts? The four of them raised their heads in confusion. Yang Chendong knew that there were some things that had to be explained clearly. Your performance in this battle was not bad. No matter what, you were able to persist until the last moment. Moreover, from the reaction at the beginning of the battle, it was very commendable to be fearless in battle and fearless in death. If I must point out your mistakes, it would be your inexperience and lack of preparation. You were too careless. You thought that with the name of mercenaries, everyone in the world would be afraid of us, and no one would find trouble with us. This is wrong. His tone was not very harsh. It was just the truth, but it was enough to make Songjia and the others reflect. In this battle, unless Yang Chendong happened to be in Hanoi City, no one would have handled the matter better than Yang Chendong. Naturally, they could not blame anyone else. In ancient wars, when the city gate was opened, it was equivalent to the city falling. The fact that Hanoi City did not change hands was already very good. There was no reprimand or punishment as expected. Instead, it was Yang Chendong who reasoned with them and talked about his experience. It was only a 2-hour conversation, but it had benefited them greatly. They believed that if the same thing happened a second time, there would be a huge reversal. Perhaps they would not need any reinforcements to drive out the invading enemy. Songjia and the others finally turned around to rest. First, they had been fighting continuously for the past few days. Whether it was physically or mentally, they were too tense. They needed a good rest to adjust their body's condition. Second, they also needed to digest some of the words of the 6th young master, and then come up with a plan to deal with any unexpected events. The others went to rest, but Yang Chendong did not. Instead, he went to the palace and began to deal with the matters that had happened in the past few days. For hours after Hanoi City was recaptured, the information from all sides was sent over. It turned out that it wasn't just Hanoi. Shiyu City and a few other major cities in Jiaoji were also under attack. The only difference was that their opponent was the former Jiaoji's fugitive, Fan Yuhai. However, according to the reports, Fan Yuhai had yet to use his full strength. It seemed that he was waiting for the results of the battle in Hanoi City. This allowed Ruan Chunqing, Chendi, and the others to barely hold on to the city without suffering too many losses. Just a bunch of flies. Tell Commander Wu Sheng to send out the 3 battalions under his command. Take the initiative to attack in companies. If you see any enemy that refuses to submit, kill them. Yang Chendong's face was cold as he gave the order. If it wasn't for the fact that Hanoi City needed someone to hold the fort, and the main force was still rushing towards Hanoi City from the sea, Yang Chendong would have personally dealt with Fan Yuhai. He had a feeling that the reason why the Lan Song Kingdom had the guts to take the initiative to attack Hanoi City was because of this person. Do you want to retake Jiaoji? Very well, let's see who's the real deal. Yang Chendong, who owned the warehouse, naturally had a domineering aura that looked down on the world. With the help of the 10,000 or so educated youths, Hanoi City was quickly restored to its original state. The corpses on the streets were carried away, and the blood that flowed out was washed clean. On the surface, there didn't seem to be any difference. However, if one had to point out a change, it would be that there was an additional large jingguan outside Hanoi City. The jingguan was made up of the heads of over 40,000 people. Beside the jingguan, there were a few tall wooden pillars with the corpses of Saishi and a few others hanging on them. Yang Chendong wanted to use this method to send a message to those who were plotting against him. This is the result of making an enemy out of me. 5 days later, the 2nd Regiment of Lungfeng, 20 auxiliary battalions, and 50,000 youths from the 2nd batch arrived at Hanoi City. They were warmly welcomed by Songjia and the rest. Especially when Songjia knew that these 50,000 youths were once part of the militia and had a certain level of military experience, he was extremely excited. He had already come up with a military plan to turn every citizen into a soldier and had received Yang Chendong's approval. Turning every citizen into a soldier meant that the citizens would still be citizens and would do whatever they were supposed to do. However, once the city was in danger, every citizen would be turned into a soldier. The youths who had received a certain level of military training would be the main force while the rest would be the support. They could take out weapons from the city's treasury and quickly arm them into combat personnel. Once they achieved merit in the war, they would receive generous rewards and so on. With Yang Chendong's approval, Songzhi even added another condition to the plan. That was, those who performed outstandingly in the war could be considered to join the Lung Feng. Just this condition alone was enough to move the hearts of countless educated youths. In Hanoi City, the most glorious thing to do was to join the Lung Feng. There was a saying that if one person joined the Lung Feng, his whole family would be honored. Let's put it this way. As long as one member of your family joined the Lung Feng, no matter where you went, you would be looked up to. No matter what you did, you would have more advantages and benefits than others. The reason why they became educated youths was not because they did not want to join the Lung Feng, but because the Lung Feng's assessment was only held twice a year, and the number of recruits was limited. Since they could not get a spot, they thought of other ways to contribute to the development of Hanoi City. Now there was a chance to join the Lung Feng. Unknowingly, these educated youths had a desire to join the Lung Feng. That way, they would have a chance to join the Lung Feng. 2 batches of educated youths would make up 100,000 people. Not only did they have a certain level of military training, but they were also very educated and very young. These people were undoubtedly highly sought after by Governor Song. However, after these people were divided into different cities, under their leadership, they would definitely become a very powerful force. If used well, they would no longer have to fear other enemies. After handing over the matters of Yunnan province to Songzhi, Yang Chendong began to think about how to deal with the Lansong kingdom. In Yang Chendong's eyes, the deal was naturally different. This deal was to destroy the kingdom. Originally, he wanted to wait for the matters of Yunnan province to settle down before dealing with the Lansong kingdom. However, since the other party had made the first move, they could not blame him for making the first move. The Lung Feng's 3rd Regiment had already returned from the various cities. Just as Yang Chendong expected, the moment the Lung Feng appeared, Fan Yuhai immediately retreated with his men. Obviously, he knew that with his 50,000 men, it was impossible for him to win against the powerful mercenaries. With the return of the Lung Feng's 3rd Regiment, the matter of setting off for the Lansong Kingdom was also brought forward. In a mere 5 days, the preparations for the war against the Lansong Kingdom were completed. In order to take revenge for the destruction of Hanoi, this time, Yang Chendong mobilized the 2nd and 3rd Regiment of the Lung Feng's 20 battalions and the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries led by Hong Jin Ho, a total of 50,000 men. According to Yang Chendong's plan, once they took down the Lansong Kingdom, Chichien City would mobilize another 50,000 young men to complete the remaining tasks. Ships of military supplies were transported from Chichien City to Yunnan province and sent to the various troops. The 40,000 mercenaries marched out of Hanoi City's west gate and headed straight for the Lansong Kingdom. Their first destination was Heping County, which was next to Yinglu City in Yunnan province. Heping County was next to the Jiaoxi region and was one of the most important cities of the Lansong Kingdom. There was a 3,000-strong Lansong army here. When the mercenaries arrived at Yinglu City after 3 days, they did not stop and continued forward. The scouts of the Lansong Kingdom spread the news to the capital, Wanxiang City. Wanxiang City, the city that represented the political and economic center of the Lansong Kingdom. Within the palace, King Piasi felt waves of pain in his teeth. He had believed Fan Yuhai's words and took the initiative to attack Jiaoxi City because he wanted to take advantage of the situation. He had heard that there were mountains of gold and silver there. As long as they won the war, they would obtain many advanced firearms that could make up for the shortcomings of the Lansong army. However, who would have thought that the main force of the mercenaries would suddenly appear? Not only did they resolve the crisis of Hanoi City, but they also defeated the 70,000 men including Sisi. Less than 10,000 men managed to escape the city. First, there was the defeat of Lotti's 100,000 men. Then there was the defeat of Sisi's 50,000 men. The Lansong Kingdom's military strength was not very strong to begin with. Now they only had 100,000 men led by Sangwon La and 20,000 royal guards left in the palace. 120,000 men against 40,000. And in this battle, it seemed like they had the advantage. However, if the enemy was the mercenaries, it would be a different story. Who didn't know that the mercenaries had the most advanced firearms in the world? Who didn't know that the mercenaries were used to winning when they were outnumbered? Where is Fan Yuhai? His face was burning with anger. Now, Piaci hated this general who had escaped from Jiaoji. If he hadn't listened to his words, he wouldn't have to face the main force of the mercenaries so early. Your Majesty, General Fan's troops have already arrived at Sangnu City. He sent someone to deliver a message, asking Your Majesty to lead the army to meet with him. He wants to defeat the mercenaries. Great General Saiwing stepped forward and saluted. A defeated mercenary? What a boastful claim. If Fan Yuhai really had such an ability, he wouldn't have had to run away like a stray dog. A mocking voice came from the crowd of officials. Then a middle-aged man with small eyes and a big head took the initiative to stand up. He cupped his fist and said respectfully to the high and mighty Piaci, Your Majesty, I think that Fan Yuhai wants to use us as a shield. He wants us to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Otherwise, why didn't Fan Yuhai make a move when Saishi had already attacked Hanoi City before? We have already suffered a loss. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Don't be fooled again. The person who spoke was the Lansong Kingdom's imperial preceptor, Long Qi. He was known for his eloquence and intelligence. He was later recruited by Piaci and given the position of imperial preceptor. Chapter 572. It could be said that if Sangwon La was the representative of the military, then Long Qi was the representative of the civil officials. When such a person stood up to express his opinion, he quickly received the support of many civil officials below. Not only that, some people simply talked about the previous sneak attack on Hanoi City. They accused it of being a mistake and playing with fire. It would only put the Lansong Kingdom in danger. Since ancient times, civil and military officials could not coexist. This was determined by their nature. Just like how military officials could only show their usefulness on the battlefield, civil officials needed the world to be peaceful. Only then could they display their talents. Once a war broke out, their abilities would be of little use. This was also why in history, whenever a war broke out, the civil officials would always advocate for peace while the military generals would always advocate for war. Piaci was still sitting on the high seat and watching everything with a smile. For an emperor, the balance of power represented their means. Civil and military opposing each other. This was what he wanted to see from the bottom of his heart. But when he saw the morale of the civil officials getting higher and higher, Sangwon La and the other military officials slowly stopped talking and kept silent. He also saw that something was wrong. He hoped for the balance of power, but he definitely did not want to see either side getting bigger. Enough. Seeing that the situation was completely one-sided, Piaci finally had to stand up and speak. With this shout, the hall quickly quieted down, showing that King Piaci's authority was still very strong. The matter of the alliance with Fan Yuhai was discussed before. How can we break the agreement? Besides, the mercenaries first attacked General Lodi and killed him. This time they killed General Cici. We are already irreconcilable with them. Let's not think about getting along peacefully. Sangwon La, this king now orders you to lead the army north and meet with General Fan Yuhai in Sangnu City. We must keep the enemy army out of the country. This subject understands. Sangwon La lowered his head and respectfully agreed. When he raised his head, he looked at Long Qi and the others with a somewhat provocative gaze. The meaning of showing off was very obvious. The court meeting ended with the king's words. If Sangwon La began to deploy the army, he also sent people to supervise the army's food. This time, an army of 100,000 was going to war. Just eating and drinking every day was not a small expense. Imperial tutor, General Sang is here to rush us for food and clothing. As soon as he returned to his residence, Long Qi saw some relevant officials waiting for him in front of his residence. He was not in a good mood, so he waved his hand impatiently. Here, give me whatever you want. State Preceptor, there are very few military supplies left in the national treasury. Do we have to take them all out at once? A few officials asked with constipation on their faces. They couldn't be blamed for being in such a difficult situation. First, 100,000 soldiers were defeated, and then 50,000 soldiers were defeated. Along with them, there were also a lot of military supplies. After a few battles, the inventory in the national treasury was getting smaller and smaller. And this time, Sangwon La was even more greedy. He wanted the weapons and clothes of 100,000 people. This was already their limit. If they really took out the weapons according to this request, the treasury would be empty. If there was a need, they would not be able to take out anything. At that time, once the king gave the order, what would they do? That was why he came to seek advice from the imperial tutor. Very few? Haven't you been forging weapons and military uniforms? Longqi asked with a frown. As the state preceptor, there were too many things he needed to manage. It was impossible for him to be clear about everything. A few officials had a difficult expression as they replied. If it's imperial tutor, we have been working hard. However, the consumption is too great. Right now, many of the weapons have only been polished for the first time. They only look like they have taken shape, but there is still a long way to go before they are tough enough. Yes, imperial tutor. It's the same for military uniforms, shoes and hats. Only a part of them has been made. The rest are only half finished. We still need many embroiderers to work overtime for at least 2 months before they can be completed. The few subordinates were talking at once, which allowed Longqi to have a better understanding of the situation. It was precisely because he understood enough that he raised his eyebrows slightly, and a strange look that no one knew flashed in his eyes. Then he quickly regained his calm. After muttering to himself for a moment, he said, "So that's the case. It's been hard on you. Sai, speaking of which, it's all because those generals only know how to fight. They don't care about your feelings at all. Since that's the case and they are in a hurry, then just give them the half-finished products." Ah. Hearing Longqi's reply, the few officials were stunned. They had an incomprehensible look on their faces. What? You don't want to? If you don't want to, then go and explain to them yourselves. This imperial tutor doesn't care anymore. Seeing that these people didn't seem to agree with his idea, Longqi angrily turned around and was about to walk into the mansion. This frightened the officials. They quickly stopped Longqi's footsteps and asked, "If we give them the half-finished products, then once they find out about it on the battlefield, what should we do?" "If they find out, then so be it. They are overestimating themselves. Besides, this time, we are supposed to cooperate with Fan Yuhai in the battle. It's just a show of strength. Of course, if you have other ideas, then you can think of them," Longqi said with an indifferent attitude. If there were other ideas, would they still ask for Longqi's opinion? Thinking that there really wasn't a better idea, and that the soldiers were all like wolves and tigers. They looked like they would be beaten up at any time if they didn't give them the items. In the end, these officials made up their minds. After all, this idea came from Imperial Tutor Longqi. If something happened, they wouldn't be alone. In the end, all of them expressed that they would listen to the order, and left the Imperial Tutor's mansion. His ears finally quietened down. Longqi strode towards the backyard of the mansion. "All of you wait outside. This Imperial Tutor wants to be alone for a while." Waving his hand, he dismissed the guards beside him and entered the courtyard alone. After there was no one around him, Longqi's footsteps became faster. After making several turns, he stopped in front of a small house. After taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and entered. The small house wasn't very big. Other than a bed, 2 chairs, and a small wooden table, there was nothing else. It looked very simple and crude. However, at this moment, there was a person sitting on a chair and fiddling with tea leaves in front of him. He seemed to be very focused and didn't seem to be displeased by the simple environment at all. "Mr. Yin." Longqi's attitude became more respectful. It was far from the high and mighty attitude he had towards the lower officials. "Imperial Tutor is here. Please take a seat. You came just in time. Try the tea leaves I just brewed." Mr. Yun smiled and pointed at the empty chair in front of him. "Then let me try Mr. Yun's craftsmanship." Long Qi squeezed out a smile and sat down on the chair. The small house suddenly became much quieter. After the tea was brewed, Mr. Yin took the initiative to pour tea for both of them. Only then did Long Qi took the teacup and took a sip. Then he pretended to be very intoxicated and said, "It's really good tea." Naturally, no one cared about whether the tea was really good or not. What everyone wanted was just the atmosphere. Mr. Yin looked at Long Qi's performance and chuckled. He understood that the other party was using this matter to express his attitude. Since the other party said that his tea was good and his attitude was so respectful, needless to say, this person had already made his decision. With this thought, the smile on his face became even wider. Then, his right hand reached into his bosom, and 1,000,000 taels of silver banknote appeared in his hand. Imperial tutor, this is from our Duke of Loyalty. With this banknote, anyone can exchange it for the same amount of silver taels at any Yang family bank. Hee. Long Qi unceremoniously reached out and took the banknote. The smile on his face was as bright as a blooming flower as he said, "Duke of Loyalty is really generous. Long Qi admires you." This banknote was worth 1,000,000 taels of silver. Just how big was the Lansong kingdom? In a year, the national treasury's income was only about 2,000,000 taels of silver. This banknote was half a year's income. Who wouldn't be envious of it? Carefully putting the banknote into his bosom, Long Qi did not wait for Mr. Yin to speak. "That's right, this is only the beginning. Duke of Loyalty said that as long as Imperial Tutor does well, he will give you a total of 5,000,000 taels of silver. This can be considered as a form of support for the Long family's business in the future." Hiss. When he heard the figure of 5,000,000 taels of silver, Long Qi, who was still smiling mischievously, could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. That was a huge amount of wealth. With this, even if the Long family did not do anything, just the interest alone would be enough to feed them for several generations. When the figure of 5,000,000 taels of silver was mentioned, the hesitation in Long Qi's heart completely disappeared. Of course, he was not worried that the Duke of Loyalty would not honor his promise. This was because he would become a role model. Whether it was good or bad, many people would see it. If the Duke of Loyalty really dared to play tricks with him, it would only cause more people's hearts to turn cold. It was said that the Duke of Loyalty was a person who did great things. He would not do things without propriety. Long Qi's thoughts were not wrong. Yang Chendong did not have the slightest intention of playing tricks with him. Since he had mentioned the figure of 5,000,000 taels of silver, he would definitely honor it. This was related to his image to the outside world. How could he do something that would destroy his own Great Wall? Then again, the reason why he had to pay such a huge price was because Long Qi himself was worth this price. 5,000,000 taels of silver was not a small amount in any country. However, when placed in the Crimson City that produced all kinds of novel goods, it was really not much. This was the advantage of having capital. As the saying goes, money can make the devil push the millstone. When the amount of silver reached a certain amount, it was not impossible for the millstone to push the devil. Furthermore, fighting a war was fighting for money. If one won a war, one could plunder more resources and good things. This seemed to have become a kind of cycle. It was just that if some people played it well, it would form a virtuous cycle. If some people did not play it well, it would easily collapse. Chapter 573. Obviously, Yang Chendong was the kind of person who liked to play. With a large warehouse, countless goods and all kinds of knowledge in his hands, this was enough to give him an advantage of a few hundred years. If he couldn't do this well, then he would have lived his life in vain. Of course, there were some things that couldn't be done immediately even if one had money. For example, the process of contacting and persuading Long Qi didn't go smoothly at first. The so-called Mr. Yin was Yun Ke, the leader of the Security Bureau's External Affairs Group 3. He was the one who had convinced Qin Di and Jiaoji Shiyu City to deal a heavy blow to King Li Li and his son, allowing the war to proceed more smoothly. After his contribution in Jiaoji, he was sent to the Lansong Kingdom and began to tackle problems here. Perhaps because the mercenaries didn't arrive here, it took a lot of effort to establish a relationship with Long Qi. After spending a lot of money, he finally met Long Qi. Long Qi still didn't trust him, or rather, he still had some illusions about the Lansong kingdom. No matter what, Long Qi was still the state preceptor of the Lansong kingdom. He was considered the role model and leader of the civil officials. For someone with such a high position and authority, it was extremely difficult for him to betray the Lansong kingdom. Fortunately, Skylark was indeed capable. In order to meet Long Qi, he spent 1,000,000 taels of silver. Sure enough, for the sake of money, the two finally met in private. Needless to say, with Skylark's ability, it didn't take long for Long Qi to be moved, especially after he was promised that the Yang family's goods in the Lansong kingdom would be given to the Long family to handle. Long Qi really couldn't refuse. But even so, Long Qi didn't agree immediately. Instead, he said that he needed to think about it. In fact, he wanted to investigate properly. Sure enough, after they met and parted ways, many people from the state preceptor's residence left the Lansong kingdom and rushed to Jiaoji and Great Ming as merchants. It was also because the investigation needed time, and before the final decision was made, Long Qi couldn't say anything. This caused Yang to not receive accurate information in advance when the battle in Hanoi City broke out, causing the mercenaries to suffer some losses. Although the sixth young master did not blame Skylark for this matter, he still blamed himself, thinking that his intelligence work was not good enough. In order to make up for this mistake, he suddenly appeared in the imperial advisor's residence and stayed there as a guest. This was definitely a risky move. Long Qi didn't reject Skylark's sudden appearance. Instead, he got someone to arrange a house for him in the backyard. The state preceptor's plan was also very good. If the people who came back with good news, he naturally wouldn't mind having a good talk with Skylark. On the other hand, he could also capture this person and send him to the king to show his loyalty. The path of advancement and retreat were both beneficial to him, so he allowed Skylark to move in. In the span of 2 months, the people that were sent out returned one after another. The news that they brought back completely shocked State Preceptor Long Qi. Doing business was an act of earning money. Long Qi was naturally clear about this. However, he didn't have a direct understanding of how profitable it was. Perhaps this was because the Lansong kingdom was too small, which limited his vision. However, the people that were sent out reported that as long as a merchant was able to do business with the mercenaries, they could be described as earning a lot of money. They used the Chang clan of the southern Ming dynasty as an example. They were originally a business aristocratic family. Later on, because of their relationship with the mercenaries, they heard that the future head of the Chang clan was a student of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. With this, they could obtain more novel goods and sell them to other merchants. With the cooperation of the Yang clan's bank, the people from the state preceptor's residence were lucky enough to see some of the account books. The figures obtained from them shocked Long Qi even more. Just the Chang clan alone could earn up to 500,000 taels of silver a month from doing business. This was also because they were in the southern Ming dynasty, where the business competition was very fierce. If they could make a net profit of 500,000 taels of silver a month, wouldn't that be 6 million taels of silver a year? If the Long clan could also get a share of the profits, the Lansong kingdom's spending power couldn't be considered small, and there wasn't that much competition. Wouldn't they be able to make a few million taels of silver a year? With the figures in front of him, Long Qi had no choice but to take action. The scales in his heart finally tilted. Under the temptation of huge profits, he finally made the final decision to agree to Yang's request for cooperation and betray the Lansong kingdom's interests. Not to mention whether the Lansong kingdom could withstand the attacks of the mercenaries. Even if it could, the foundation of the kingdom would be shaken. Even if he was the state preceptor, how much could he gain from this? Not to mention that his position as the state preceptor wasn't permanent. It was already lonely at the top and there were many people secretly coveting this position. If he did something wrong, it was very likely that he would be consigned to eternal damnation. Then if the mercenaries won the war, where would he go? No matter how he looked at it, it was better to cooperate with the mercenaries. After all, the benefits were there, and he wouldn't lose it. As long as he had money, he could enjoy life. As for what would happen to the Lansong kingdom, it had nothing to do with him. He was just a subject, wasn't he? With a decision in his heart, Long Qi finally came to the backyard to meet the guest elder who had been in his residence for 2 months. When he came, Young guessed that the other party had made up his mind and took out 1,000,000 taels of silver note, leaving the other party with no way out. Under the temptation of so much money, Long Qi indeed had no way out. Under the influence of greed, it was possible to do anything, not to mention the 3,000,000 taels of silver that would be given after the matter was completed. Long Qi was actually thinking about it. It was possible to do business, but one had to have the capital to do so. Even though he had been the state preceptor for a few years, in reality, there were too many people that he needed to feed. In terms of money, he had only accumulated a few 100,000 taels, and this was under the situation where he held great power. Now that he even had the capital to do business, he naturally wouldn't have any scruples. He told Young everything that happened in today's court meeting, as well as the few subordinates in charge of the war logistics looking for him. Very good. Young was very satisfied with Long Qi's attitude. Since the state preceptor has already expressed his stance, then we are all on the same side. The victory of the mercenaries is also our victory. For this kind of victory, I think we can have some ideas on the soldiers of the Lan Song Kingdom. As long as we can control their logistics, it will be a great achievement. And if we really do make a contribution in this matter, I can consider suggesting to the Duke of Loyalty to give the state preceptor more money as a reward. Hearing that there was a great reward, Long Qi's eyes almost narrowed into slits. In order to express his gratitude, he revealed another piece of information. Mr. Yun, my people have discovered that many of the Han people stationed in the Lan Song Kingdom are being gathered. As for what they are doing, I am not too sure. Oh, there is such a thing? After hearing this, Young's expression became much more serious. Although he didn't understand the reason behind this, it wouldn't happen for no reason. It seemed that there was a need to report this matter to the 6th young master. 40,000 mercenaries took down Hepping Town in a single attack. The town walls weren't high to begin with. The enemy only had 3,000 people and 10,000 civilians. It was impossible to stop the mercenaries from advancing. After taking over the town, Yang Chendong entered the barracks of the Lan Song soldiers. Lung Feng's second commander Luo Pe, political commissar Kong Jia, third commander Wu Sheng, and political commissar Chen Bo all came to the 6th young master. 6th young master, in this battle, we have captured around 1,800 Lan Song soldiers. How should we deal with them? Should we send them back to Vietnam with the civilians, and send them back to Ryukyu Island by sea? The political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, asked. Things like this after a battle were usually handled by political cadres like them. Send the civilians back. There is no need for the soldiers. Kill them all. Yang Chendong was still looking at the sand table that Tiger's Mane had just made. He didn't even raise his head as he spoke. Kill them all? Kong Jia thought he heard wrong and asked again. Yes, kill them all. The martyrs of Hanoi City need an explanation from us. Since the Lan Song nation dared to find trouble with us, they should be prepared for our revenge. Yang Chendong raised his head as he spoke. Then his gaze swept across Luo Pe and the other 3. What? Do you have any questions? Being stared at by Yang Chendong, the 4 of them instantly felt pressured. However, the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, and the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment, Chen Bo, gritted their teeth and spoke out together. 6th young master, killing prisoners is not a good thing. Chen Bo was originally a military officer. Even now, he was still the battalion commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment. However, since he was also the political commissar of the regiment, he had to carry out his authority. He stood up and spoke out together with Kong Jia. Yang Chendong raised his eyebrows. He seemed a little displeased. Of course, killing prisoners is not good. However, it is also a means of war. As long as it can intimidate the enemy, this young master thinks that the death of these 1,800 people is worth it. All right, it's settled. Go and carry it out. He casually waved his hand and concluded the matter. He did not give anyone else the right to speak. Yang Chendong was already giving them face by explaining to the 2 political commissars. If they still had any objections, then he wouldn't mind replacing them. It was a good thing for officers to have their own opinions. However, it depended on what kind of situation they were in. This was a war that could destroy a nation. If they had even the slightest bit of mercy, it would prove that they were not suitable for this kind of war. There was no other way. Although Kong Jie and Chen Bo's faces were still a little gloomy, they still knew how to behave and left the room. Obviously, Yang Chendong's power was so great that his words carried enormous weight. Chapter 574. Since it was an order from the sixth young master, they had to carry it out. This was also the first lesson they learned after becoming the Cold Vanguard, which was to obey orders. The officers retreated. Yang Chendong, who was still looking at the sand table, punched the name of Wood Province. Order: the entire army will rest for a day, then attack Wood Province. Yang Chendong's words carried a hint of killing intent. The tragic scene in Hanoi City's commercial street had provoked him. His dream was to lead all the Han people to the peak of the world. He had just taken a step forward, but he had already suffered such a blow. This made him feel very guilty, and he also planned to vent his anger on Lansong Nation. Peace Town had been broken, and the mercenaries were charging towards Wood Province. After the frontline battle report returned, Fan Yuhai had already sent people to Lansong Land's capital, Wanxiang City, to urge for reinforcements. He even said that if reinforcements did not appear, he would retreat. He had originally come to help Lansong Nation, but now that the main character had not appeared, what was the meaning of him, the helper, staying here? Fan Yuhai's heart desired to defeat the mercenaries. In order to achieve this goal, he had made a lot of preparations this time. However, this did not stop him from scaring Lansong Nation. After all, the mercenaries were now in Lansong Nation's territory. By the time Fan Yuhai's men arrived at Wanxiang City, Sang Wenla had already led 100,000 soldiers out of the city. Since the king had already given the order, he naturally did not dare to delay. However, the required rations had not been gathered, and he could not possibly let the soldiers go to the battlefield on an empty stomach. Wasn't this? He had just finished preparing the military supplies when he led the army out. However, he did not know how terrible the rations that he had spent so much effort to obtain were. The rice was old, and it was the kind that had already started to rot and mold. The weapons were semi-finished products. They only looked in good shape, but when they were actually used, one would know how weak they were. Even the quality of the uniforms they wore was extremely poor. Some of them had already been unstitched before they even reached Sangwon City, causing countless soldiers to curse them. All of this was naturally the work of State Preceptor Long Qi. He had already accepted Skylark's 2 million taels of silver. After making the decision to rely on the Duke of Loyalty, he no longer feared anyone. Moreover, in his eyes, since these 100,000 soldiers had left, there was no need for them to think about coming back. What was there to be afraid of? Half a month later, in front of Sangnu City, the armies of both sides set up their battle formations, looking like they were going to fight it out. The attacking party consisted of more than 40,000 mercenaries. They left Hanoi, passed through Ing Brothel, took over Heping Town, and took over Muzhou City. They came all the way to Sangnu City. From afar, the defending side seemed to have the advantage in numbers. Sang Wenla led 100,000 troops, and with Fan Yuhai's 50,000, they had a total of 150,000 men. This did not include the 100,000 workers and 30,000 Han civilians that they had recruited from the nearby cities. The Lansong Kingdom once had an alias called the Laos Comfort Department. It was originally a province of the Great Ming Dynasty. However, because the Great Ming Dynasty had lost its rule over Jiaoji, and the originally powerful Great Ming Dynasty had split into two after the Tumu Rebellion, Jiaoji was naturally no longer under the Great Ming Dynasty's control. However, there were still some Han civilians within the Great Ming Dynasty. It was as if these 30,000 people were forcibly recruited from the nearby cities. Now half of these Han civilians were pushed to the front of the battlefield. The remaining half were mixed in with the Lansong soldiers and Fan Yuhai's men. This was to prevent the mercenaries from firing cannons. Fan Yuhai had already experienced how advanced their cannons were during the Battle of Hanoi City. With that experience, he was fully prepared this time. The 30,000 Han civilians mixed in with the army were prepared to deal with the cannons. There were also 100,000 Lansong civilians. They had set up hundreds of catapults. In comparison, these catapults were very simple. Some were even built with rough wood, and the joints were connected with thick ropes. They could not be used for long, but when there were many of them, they were still quite powerful. This was the second method that Fan Yuhai had prepared. Since it was the second method, there should be a third. That's right, the third method was the 5,000 light cavalry. This was all that Fan Yuhai had. He had even taken out the 1,000,000 taels of silver that Baiming had given him. Only then could he have such a cavalry force that could charge and retreat quickly. Before the Ming dynasty, the Mongols relied on their invincible war horses to kill their way into the Central Plains and establish the Yuan dynasty. From this, one could see how strong cavalry was. Other than these three methods, Fan Yuhai had another trump card, which was Li Min and Shen Kuan. They were all experts in close combat and possessed decent martial arts. As long as they found the right opportunity, they would be able to sever the head of the Duke of Loyalty amidst the chaos. If they succeeded, the mercenaries would be defeated without a leader. At that time, he would lead his army and fight his way through, restoring the glory of Jiaoji and reliving the glory of the past. For this battle, Fan Yuhai had put in a lot of effort and made ample preparations. Right now he was riding on a horse and mixed in with the cavalry. As he looked at the mercenaries in the distance who had also set up their battle formation, a trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his eyes. He wanted to see how the great Ming's loyal duke, who was rumored to care for the Han people, would break out of this situation. On the side of the mercenaries, when they saw many civilians in Han attire being pushed to the front of the troops by the enemy, some of the officers immediately felt a sense of helplessness. Those who were able to become mercenaries had all stayed in Qiqian City before. Naturally, they knew about the sixth young master's dream of reviving the Han people. This dream was not just for show. In the Battle of Jiaoji, the number of Han people saved had reached 80,000, and this number was still increasing as more cities surrendered. It could be said that the reason why the Cold Vanguard could be so united was because of the rising status of the Han people. Most of them were people who had suffered before, so they didn't want to see their children suffer again. Now that they had the chance to conquer a country for them and live a better life, how could they not give it their all? However, with so many of their compatriots standing in front of them and blocking their way, they felt like they had punched cotton, and it was very depressing. Through the binoculars, Yang Chendong saw the enemy's formation clearly, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. Forcing the people to fight was clearly a despicable act, and it was shameful for a real man. If such a thing happened in the future, it would definitely be opposed and reprimanded by all the countries in the world. However, it was only the 14th century now, and the slogan of human rights had not been used before. Even Yang Chendong himself did not know how many people he had built, so it would be ridiculous to talk about human rights at this time. It could be said that the war at this time was all about cruelty and unscrupulous means. Fan Yuhai's actions made some people curse him for not being a hero and not doing things in an open and above-board manner. There was really nothing else to say about it. "Young master." Tiger's Mane stood at the side and shouted, not knowing what to do. The two commanders of the Cold Vanguard and the political commissar came to Yang Chendong's temporary command center. The situation at the front line was complicated, and it made them feel powerless. Of course, not all of them cared about the lives of the people. For example, the third commander, Wu Sheng, wanted to say that they should just kill. With the advanced cannons and continuous fire guns they had prepared, they only needed a fierce charge to suppress the enemy's morale, and there was hope for victory. Of course, this was only a thought in his mind, and Wu Xing did not dare to say it out loud. He did not know what the sixth young master meant, and he dared to make such a statement. If he made him unhappy, his position as commander would be over. The four commanders were waiting for Yang Chendong's instructions. The command center was extremely quiet, until Beta Persei shouted, "Not good, the enemy is moving, and they are slowly walking towards us." "What?" Luo Pe and the others exclaimed, and each of them looked at the battlefield through the binoculars on their chests. Yang Chendong also took the binoculars from Beta Persei, and saw the enemy encircling the Han civilians and approaching the center of the battlefield step by step. The look in his eyes became even more gloomy, and the command center was so silent that you could hear a pin drop. After a long time, he finally spat out a word with difficulty: retreat. What? Wu Sheng's reaction was the most intense, as if he could not believe his ears. How could such a military order be given? I said retreat, everyone retreat. Yang Chendong was like an angry lion, and he roared at Wu Sheng. This time everyone heard it clearly, and their bodies tensed up, and they immediately carried out their mission. Yang Chendong was left alone in his chair. He knew that these Han civilians were not real Han civilians, and they had lived in the Lansong kingdom for many years, and they had already gotten married or had children there. In their hearts, they had probably long forgotten about the great Ming dynasty. If these people died, then they died, and it was not considered a loss. However, in front of so many people, Yang Chendong had no choice but to give such a military order. This was because he wanted to establish a side in the army that loved his people like his own children. He wanted everyone to know that his goal of leading all Han people to the top of the world had not changed. Young Master. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei walked to Yang Chendong's left and right. The two of them did not know what to say at this moment, and only thought that they should accompany the young master at this time. I'm fine, you guys pack up and retreat. Yang Chendong seemed to be very weak as he waved his hand. However, in reality, the look in his eyes was extremely firm. He had already thought of a plan to deal with this situation, and what he did just now was more of an act. In fact, as early as a few days ago, Yang's information was sent over. Among them was the news that the nearby Han civilians were suddenly recruited. The moment he saw this news, Yang Chendong guessed in his mind what Fan Yuhai was going to do. Chapter 575. Using civilians as hostages. Perhaps the ancient people did not experience this many times. However, during the anti-Japanese era, this kind of thing happened countless times. However, this seemingly old-fashioned method was the most effective against those benevolent and righteous people. On this issue, their seniors had suffered many losses. When they were studying in the military academy, the instructors had also brought up this problem. It was a pity that even in the future, when technology was more advanced, no one could think of a good way to solve this problem. Fortunately, the students back then knew the nobility of human rights. No matter who it was, if they wanted to use this method again, they would first have to endure great pressure. They did not think that they would encounter such a situation again. At that time, Yang Chendong had also thought of this problem, but it was just a thought. After that, he threw it to the back of his mind. After all, he also did not think that such a thing would happen to him. He was the most powerful cold vanguard, the king of soldiers. He was used to carry out dangerous missions, and not in this kind of conventional battle. The most hateful thing was that he actually had to face this problem now. For the past few days, Yang Chendong had been thinking about it. Until last night, when he looked at the moon hanging high in the sky and the bright moonlight shone down on the earth, he finally made a decision. Although it was not the best method, at least it was passable and no one would criticize him. Yang Chendong gave the order to retreat. The 40,000-strong army retreated for tens of li. When the sky was about to turn dark, Fan Yuhai's army finally stopped advancing. Then everyone's face was filled with joy as they laughed heartily. They thought that they had finally found the soft rope of the mercenaries. If they had known that this method would be so effective, they would not have lost Jiaoji. Following the laughter, the 30,000 Han people were speechless and angry. Originally, they did not know what they were going to do here. However, after everything that happened today, they finally saw the truth. It turned out that they were going to be used as human shields. The anger in their hearts was as fierce as a tiger. No. It could only be said that they were like cats. In front of Fan Yuhai and the Lansong Kingdom's army, who were many times more numerous than them, they did not dare to resist. All these years of living here had smoothed out the edges and corners of their struggles, making them accustomed to being oppressed and resigned to their fate. Of course, they were more worried that the Han army would suddenly launch an attack on them. If that was the case, the 10,000 Han soldiers at the front would undoubtedly be the first to be killed. Just like that, they were on tenterhooks for an entire day. Only when the sky had completely darkened did the Han citizens let out a sigh of relief. Although they did not know what would happen the next day, no matter what, they had managed to get through today's ordeal. Haha, as expected, these Han people are mercenaries. In the central tent, Sangwang La's face was full of excitement. He sat on the big chair and drank wine. He felt incomparably carefree. Fan Yuhai was also very happy. Obviously, the feeling of having everything under control made him very comfortable. However, he was still a famous general, so he wouldn't easily show his arrogant side. Wasn't the mercenary army still there? To become a famous general, there were several requirements. For example, accurate judgment, fearless courage, the ability to control the entire situation, as well as a humble and cautious mentality. Fan Yuhai was undoubtedly qualified, but his years of cautiousness still made him say to Sangwang La, "General Sang, it's too early to be happy. The mercenaries are only retreating, they have not been defeated by us." Looking at these mercenaries, their military discipline is indeed strict. Even when they were retreating, they were still in an orderly manner. They will not be easy to deal with. As for the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries, their morale is already starting to weaken. Why don't we attack them when we advance tomorrow? As long as these 30,000 people are defeated, it will definitely affect the main force of the mercenaries. At that time, our opportunity will be presented. Everything that happened today had already proven Fan Yuhai's ability. Sangwang La naturally believed in his words. He nodded. Okay, tomorrow morning we will plan properly. It's about time we take the initiative to attack. Previously, they did not attack because they were not sure if the Han citizens would be effective against the mercenaries. After all, this was an opponent that killed without batting an eyelid. Just the number of Jingguan statues that they had created was unknown. But now that they had found their weakness, how could they not take advantage of it? Good. Tomorrow we will definitely defeat the mercenaries. Haha, let's drink. Fan Yuhai was in a good mood as he raised his wine glass high towards his ally. Cheers. Sangwang La laughed loudly, showing the arrogant side of him when it came to drinking. The cold front had a strict discipline. During wartime, regardless of the reason, no one was allowed to drink. Because of this, they had even punished a few low-ranking officers. Those who were able to enter the cold front were all outstanding individuals. To become an officer, one had to put in a lot of effort and go through a lot of trials. Their family was extremely proud of having an officer in the cold front. But it was precisely because of drinking that they were taken away that they were wrongly accused. With such an example, even those who loved to drink could only suppress their desire for good food. There was no other choice. The treatment of the cold front was too good, and the halo that it gave off was too strong. No one was willing to voluntarily withdraw from such a team. At this moment, not only was no one in the cold front drinking, they were all sitting quietly. A strong sense of pressure was building up above their heads. For the first time, the incident during the day made them feel helpless. Facing their own compatriots, some of them even felt hatred in their hearts. Perhaps it was because their daily political work was too good, but the word surrender did not exist in the dictionary of the cold front soldiers. Even if they were the only ones left on the battlefield, they would still fight fiercely to show their existence. After all, if they became martyrs, their families would be respected and treated well. If they became captives, their families would not be able to raise their heads with them for the rest of their lives. Under this kind of ideological education, they looked down on those who were spineless, even if they were Han citizens. Just like the 10,000 Han citizens who walked in front of the enemy during the day. Although they were forced to do so and had their own difficulties, it was not a reason for them to help the enemy do evil. Could it be that if the mercenaries and the cold front were defeated, these Han citizens would be considered meritorious? Would they be able to live a good life? The answer was obviously not like that. If the mercenaries were defeated, these Han citizens would no longer have any value. Although they would not be killed immediately, they would not be able to live a good life. Furthermore, because the mercenaries had injured many of the Lansang Kingdom soldiers, they would only vent their anger on these Han citizens. In other words, From the moment the mercenaries appeared on the land of the Lansang Kingdom, these Han people only had two choices. One was to live in grievance, the other was to bravely stand up and resist. Perhaps they would die, but perhaps they would be able to completely change the trajectory of their lives. This principle could be seen by all the cold front soldiers, but these Han citizens did not seem to be able to see it. Perhaps it was because they were uneducated and did not know how to think, or perhaps they did not know what resistance was. They did not know how to rely on their own efforts to earn the respect of others, to obtain their own dignity. Or perhaps, they did not even want to consider and face this problem. If that was the case, what was the difference between these people being alive and dead? For the sake of these people, they had no choice but to retreat. Who would feel good about it? If not for the strict discipline of the cold front soldiers, where obeying orders was the first thing they learned after joining the army, they would not have retreated step by step and revealed a trace of helplessness. However, the orders came from the sixth young master, so naturally, they could only obey. The cold front soldiers and the 20 auxiliary battalions ate dinner in such an atmosphere. After that, no one said a word, silently hugging their rifles and returning to their own barracks. The sky was already dark, but not a single soldier said that they were going to sleep. Under the suffocating state of mind, they probably would not be able to sleep even if they were asked to. Who knew if they would have nightmares when they finally fell asleep? No, we can't allow others to bully us like this. We must resist. Among the auxiliary soldiers, a company commander called Wang Yong suddenly broke the silence and stood up. Wang Yong's personality was straightforward. In order to avenge his family, he did not hesitate to enter the cold front soldiers' barracks under the guise of herding pigs, and caused a huge ruckus. Fortunately, he was lucky enough to meet the sixth young master, Yang Qindong. After that, not only did he kill his enemy, Cheng Yuan, from the Huang bandit army, he was also assigned as a temporary auxiliary soldier. After experiencing more than a dozen battles, Wang Yong finally matured. Not only did he become an auxiliary soldier, but he also became a company commander of the auxiliary soldiers. With his personality, it was normal for him to suddenly stand up and express his unfairness at this time. Originally, everyone was very depressed. All they lacked was a fuse to ignite their emotions. Wang Yong's sudden appearance gave everyone an outlet to vent their emotions. Very quickly he received the support of many officers. Everyone was holding a breath in their hearts, but they did not know what to do. Since someone said that it was unfair, and wanted to ask the sixth young master for help, many officers stood up. At first, it was only Wang Yong's battalion. Soon, this atmosphere spread to the other battalions, and they received even more support. In the end, even the cold front soldiers joined in. Commander Wu Sheng became the leader of the crowd. He brought more than 50 officers of platoon rank and above to the temporary command center. What are you all doing? Looking at the sudden appearance of so many officers in such a menacing manner, the first and second guards in charge of the arrangements became 100 times more alert. Some of the guards even unlocked the safety of their guns, as if they were ready to fire at any moment. Chapter 576. The captain of the first guard team, Qiu Vi, and the captain of the second guard team, Dao Xiao, were also holding their guns. Their eyes were filled with anger, especially when they looked at Wu Sheng, the leader of these officers. Their eyes were filled with murderous intent. Obviously, they thought that this was a mutiny and that Wu Sheng was the leader. Wu Sheng's face turned bitter when he noticed the two guard captains' murderous gazes. He would not dare to harm the sixth young master even if he had 100 guts. He was here to ask for a battle. In order to avoid any misunderstandings, he and the other officers did not bring any weapons. Captains, you've misunderstood. We're here to request a battle. We're not here to harm the sixth young master. We don't have the guts to do that. In order to clear up the misunderstanding, Wu Sheng nervously explained. Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao did not listen to Wu Sheng's explanation. They only knew that these people had come to the sixth young master's tent without orders, and had threatened the safety of the tent. They had to deal with these people according to their duties. Men, tie these people up. Once the two captains gave the order, 60 guards ran out from all corners and pounced on the 50-plus officers like ferocious tigers. These guards did not care what they were here for. Since their captains had given the order, they did not hold back. They used all their strength and pressed the officers who had come to ask for a battle to the ground. However, the officers didn't dare to resist. If they did, it would be no different from a rebellion. But the problem was, who dared to rebel against Yang Chendong? Soon the 50 officers were restrained. Their hands were tied behind their backs and pressed to the ground. Some of the officers had to pay a price for this. For example, their mouths came into close contact with the ground, and they were already eating dirt. Wu Sheng was also held down. Perhaps because he was the captain and a fierce general, the number of people holding him down increased from 1 to 2. With the 8 captains, Jiang Yupeng, controlling him, he could not resist at all. "We can't accept what you're doing. We want to see the 6th young master." Although he was restrained, his mouth wasn't sealed. Wu Sheng was still shouting and yelling. He was now the leader of Cold Front. And he was definitely one of the higher-ups of Cold Front. But now he was actually being pressed to the ground and eating dirt. How could he be willing? Hearing Wu Sheng shout, the other officers also shouted, looking like they would rather be beaten to death. "Seal their mouths," Cho Wu said with a black face when he saw that he couldn't calm them down. He looked like he was about to sew Wu Sheng's and the others' mouths with a needle. Once the order was given, some members immediately went to find towels and other things to stuff their mouths with. This caused the officers to struggle even more. If they were really gagged, then wouldn't they really become rebellious officers who couldn't speak reason? What? Seeing that the situation was about to change if the officers resisted, the guards were about to be ruthless. Just as they were about to get injured, a voice shouted. Tiger's Mane, a senior colonel, appeared. There were only 3 senior colonels in the entire Yangxia army. They were the army's division commander, Lung Song, and the navy's division commander, Gao Xiong. The last one was Tiger's Mane. This also showed his lofty status and identity. As soon as Tiger's Mane appeared, 2 guard captains immediately walked up and said, "Tiger's Mane, these officers came without orders. There are so many of them. We were afraid that there would be problems, so we took the initiative." "No. We didn't even bring a single weapon. How could we have other thoughts? We just want to see the 6th young master. We want to fight." Wu Sheng, who was pinned down, forced his head up and looked at Tiger's Mane. At the same time, he looked at Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu with a warning gaze. It was as if he was saying, "Brats, I'll remember you. Just wait and see how I'll deal with you later." Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu naturally didn't care about the threat in Wu Sheng's eyes. They were the 6th young master's guards. They already had a high status. Even if Lung Song and Gao Xiong were here, they didn't have the right to order them around. Enough. Tiger's Mane saw everything. His body shook and he shouted angrily, "We're all brothers. Why are you using weapons? Let them go." "Let them go?" Tiger's Mane, there are more than 50 of them. "Once," the 2nd guard captain Dao Xiao said unwillingly. "Once what? Or do you have no confidence in yourselves? Even 60 people with guns can't deal with 50 people? Listen to my order. Let them go. The 6th young master wants to see them." Tiger's Mane's eyes flashed coldly as he looked at Dao Xiao. Once he heard that it was the 6th young master's order, Dao Xiao immediately became obedient. After he agreed, he gave the order to let them go. Wu Sheng and the rest of the 50 guards were freed. Wu Sheng stood up. He first shook off the dirt on his body. Then he saluted Tiger's Mane and said, "Thank you for your help, Tiger's Mane." "There's no need to thank me. This is the 6th young master's idea. But I also want to remind you that when you see the 6th young master, you only need to express your opinion and attitude. Don't make a fuss. Otherwise, before anyone else can deal with you, I'll make the first move." Tiger's Mane's words were not just for show. Everyone knew that he had been serving the 6th young master for many years, and was regarded as the most trusted person. If they offended him, Wu Sheng and the rest would not be able to withstand his suppression. It wouldn't even be long before their military officer halos would be removed. Knowing that he could not go against Tiger's Mane, Wu Sheng nodded repeatedly. "Don't worry, Tiger's Mane. We know what we're doing." Although he said that, Whether he knew what he was doing or not was quickly seen. When Wu Sheng and the rest of the 50 guards entered the command center, they became enraged again. One by one they asked to fight. Some even said that if they couldn't fight, they might as well be demoted. This was because they couldn't lead the soldiers under them. It would be better to be an ordinary soldier. The shouting continued for a while. Tiger's Mane scolded them several times, but there was no effect at all. The guards all talked at once and had no intention of stopping. Yang Chendong sat in his chair and watched Wu Sheng and the others' performance very calmly. He did not speak at all. It wasn't until the time it took for a stick of incense to burn past, and the guards were all talking that he coughed softly. Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, immediately understood and shouted, "Shut up, all of you. The young master has something to say." A voice like a lion's roar resounded throughout the command center, causing everyone's eardrums to tremble. At this time, they finally understood why the 6th young master always told Beta Persei to speak softly. If he didn't suppress it, no one's ears would be able to withstand such a loud voice ringing in their ears every day. But the effect of this roar was also good. At least everyone's mouths were half closed and no one said anything more. The command center quieted down. Yang Chendong's gaze slowly swept across everyone one by one. Anyone who was stared at by his gaze would involuntarily lower their head, like a child who had made a mistake. "You want to ask for battle?" Yang Chendong finally asked the first question after an unknown amount of time. "Yes, 6th young master, we want to ask for battle." Wu Sheng's official position was the highest here, so naturally, he was the one who answered Yang Chendong's question. Yang Chendong wasn't surprised or angry that Wu Sheng stood up for him. Instead, he asked, "Then do you know that the enemy has placed our compatriots in the front line? If we attack, we might hurt them." Wu Sheng nodded. "We know." Wu Sheng answered happily. Obviously, he had already thought about the situation and problems he would face before he came. Thus, not only did he answer without hesitation, he also said the following words very smoothly. "But we also know that if we blindly retreat, it will not only harm our compatriots in front of us, but even our Han compatriots behind us will also be implicated. We can't lose the big picture for the small. Besides, what are you talking about?" Yang Chendong asked with interest when he saw Wu Sheng's hesitant look. "Besides." As if he had gathered his courage, Wu Sheng said with a resolute expression, "Besides, they are now being threatened by the enemy and have no intention of resisting. Then they are not our compatriots, but the enemy's accomplices. Facing such people, we can't be soft-hearted." "Nonsense." Yang Chendong's originally amiable face suddenly turned cold, stopping Wu Sheng from saying what he wanted to say next. 6th young master. Wu Sheng wanted to continue speaking, but Tiger's Mane, who knew Yang Chendong very well, shouted loudly, "Listen to the young master. If you dare to speak nonsense again, I will lock you up." Putting aside the unpleasant feeling of being locked up, just the fact that they were facing a powerful enemy, if they were locked up, wouldn't they miss out on the big battle? Without a battle to fight, that was Wu Sheng's weakness. He quickly shut his mouth and did not dare to continue speaking. Wu Sheng didn't say anything, but Yang Chendong continued. "Just because they were threatened by the enemy doesn't mean that we don't recognize them as our compatriots. In fact, they've suffered a lot over the years. They suffered a lot. The reason why we attacked the Lansong nation was not only to take revenge for provoking us, but also to save more Han people, so that they can live a better life like our family. Don't you think so?" Yes, the 6th young master is merciful. For the sake of the Han people, heaven and earth can be our witness." The group of officers said in unison. They weren't trying to flatter him, but they were thinking the same thing from the start. "All right, since everyone agrees with my point of view, let's prepare for the army's retreat after daybreak. If there are no other questions, you can all go back." Yang Chendong waved his hand helplessly as if the matter had been settled. Chapter 577. If it was any other time, Yang Chendong would have said something like this and no one would have any objections. However, when they heard that there was still a retreat, the officers could not accept it. If they continued to retreat like this, when would there be an end? 6th young master, We can't retreat anymore. If we continue to retreat, we will have to return to Yunnan province. There are more Han people there. Once the war extends there, the losses will be even greater. Yes, we can't retreat anymore, sixth young master. It's not wrong for you to feel sorry for the Han people, but doing so will only allow the enemy to take a mile after taking an inch and hurt more people. We can't retreat, we have no way out. The officers all spoke at once. No matter what they said, there was only one conclusion, and that was that they could not retreat anymore. We really can't retreat anymore, sixth young master. Suddenly, a voice rang out from outside the command center. Following that, 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe, Political Commissar Kong Jia, and 3rd Regiment Political Commissar Chen Bo strode into the command center. With such a huge commotion, how could the three of them not know? There was only one reason why they did not appear, and that was because they had the same thoughts as these officers. Since they had the same thoughts, why not let these people cause a ruckus? Perhaps there would be some good results. However, outside the tent, when they heard Yang Chendong say that they would continue to retreat, the three of them could not help but take the initiative to stand out. Another 3 regimental-level officers stood out. Together with Wuxia, all 4 regimental-level officers had the same attitude. Obviously, this brought a lot of pressure to Yang Chendong. This could be seen from the fact that he did not speak and was frowning. Yang Chendong did not speak, which meant that he valued the opinions of Luo Pe and the other 2. Since they were not rejected immediately, the 3 of them saw an opportunity and hope. After looking at each other, the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, stepped out and said in a pleading tone, "Sixth young master, we have to fight this war. If we retreat, it will really be like what everyone said. We will only implicate more Han brothers. So counterattack is necessary, and as long as we handle it well, we should be able to reduce the number of casualties." What do you think? Yang Chendong looked at Kong Jia and asked. "Sixth young master, I think that when we start the attack, we can shout the slogan, 'Tell the Han people to get down.' If they do, our bullets will only sweep across them. That way, the possibility of hurting them will be minimized. Isn't that better?" Kong Jia said his idea in one breath. From this point, it could be seen that his idea was not a sudden one, but an answer that he had thought about for a long time. Yang Chendong praised the other party's method in his heart. It seemed that this was the only way. However, on the surface he still looked contemplative and doubtful. If that's the case, our cannons won't be able to exert their advantage. Can we defeat hundreds of thousands of enemies? That's not a problem. I promise that we officers will charge at the front line and set an example to all the soldiers. As long as we charge fiercely and fast enough, and don't give the enemy a chance to counterattack, even without the support of cannons, we can still win the battle. Wuxia finally had a chance to speak again. He said excitedly and patted his chest as if he was giving a military order. With Wuxia taking the lead, the other officers also followed suit. One by one, they patted their chests and made a promise. At this moment, the morale of the soldiers was high and strong. Yang Chendong also knew that it was time to make a decision. He had been waiting for this moment. Good. Meng suddenly stood up from his chair. Since everyone is so confident, what you said is also very reasonable. Then I order everyone to go down and prepare. After 2 hours, we will launch a fierce attack. But you must remember what you said and do your best to ensure the safety of our fellow Han people. Yes. The 60 officers saluted together. At this moment, they were all extremely excited. This was a battle that they had taken the initiative to ask for. They would definitely give it their all and not let the 6th young master look down on them. However, they did not know that this was all arranged by Yang Chendong. During the day, no one noticed the sudden meeting between Tiger's Mane and Wang Yong. The process was simple. Tiger's Mane used his status to ask Wang Yong for help and mobilized more officers to persuade the 6th young master. As for whether this was Tiger's Mane's request or Yang Chendong's own idea, only the master and servant knew. The petition finally ended with the satisfaction of all the officers. The next step was to prepare for the battle. There were 2 reasons for choosing to fight at night. Firstly, It was because the enemy would not be able to completely control the Han civilians under their control. Secondly, it was because the morale of the troops was at its peak. If they did not make use of this opportunity, it would inevitably be discouraged during the day. This would directly affect their fighting strength. As for how effective it would be to shout slogans to get the Han people to kneel down and cooperate with them, no one could predict. There should be some effect, but it was impossible to not kill a single Han person. The petitioning officers returned to their respective barracks. Then they recounted the scene of their encounter with the sixth young master to everyone with exaggerated details, causing many people to be extremely excited. This was a battle opportunity that they had taken the initiative to ask for. Of course, they had to perform well. Otherwise, not only would they fail to live up to the trust that the sixth young master had placed in them, they would also be punished for it. Even if it was for their own future, they had to perform well this time. The fighting spirit of the officers was roused. Very quickly, the soldiers under them were all riled up. Originally, the retreat during the day had already made them extremely unhappy. Now that they could finally fight back, no one would say anything. They all patted their chests and promised that they would perform well. The mercenaries were already in an uproar. Their fighting spirit soared into the sky. The enemy camp was completely unaware. Late at night, Fan Yuhai and Sangwang returned to their respective tents to rest after finishing their drinking. They wanted to have a good night's sleep and wait until dawn to see how the mercenaries retreated. Then they would look for an opportunity to attack. The weather at the end of January was still slightly cold. Many Lansong soldiers and former Jiaoji soldiers on night duty curled up and leaned against each other for warmth. They closed their eyes and took a nap. In the darkness, 400 meters away, the mercenaries had already charged back. In comparison, they were all burning with passion. At this moment, they were staring at the enemy under the torches. As soon as the order to attack was given, the entire army would charge out. In order to better complete this mission, the 2 main regiments of the Cold Front and 20 auxiliary battalions were all mobilized. A total of over 10,000 people wielded the 95 style or 81 rifles. They looked like ferocious tigers descending from the mountains. Behind them were 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries, led by General Hong Jin. They were all waiting for the battle to begin. Pass down the order. Later on, everyone will perform well. Do not fall behind the mercenaries. Chop off the enemy's dog head. Hong Jin was also holding back his anger as he spoke. He could already feel the anger in the sixth young master's heart. When his master was angry, as a dog, he naturally had to take a bite out of the enemy. It was not only to show his ability, but also to show his loyalty. He would definitely not let go of such an opportunity. The hands on the watch moved up and down. When it was 1 a.m., Luopa, the regimental commander of the 2nd Regiment, and Wu Sheng, the regimental commander of the 3rd Regiment, stood up almost at the same time and roared, "Charge!" Then, thousands of soldiers and horses started to move at a high speed. More than 40,000 people roared in unison. Their footsteps landed on the ground, causing the earth to tremble at this moment. The moon hanging high in the sky also drilled into the clouds at this moment. It seemed to be afraid, or perhaps it could not bear to see the massacre happen. What's going on? A sudden roar rang out, causing the enemy soldiers 400 meters away to wake up from their daze. However, before they could react, more and more enemies appeared in their line of sight. Following that, thousands of gunshots rang out. The first wave of 500 enemies did not even have the time to dodge. They were shot and killed one by one, turning into corpses. It was only a distance of 400 meters, and the Cold Front and auxiliary soldiers were sprinting forward. In just a minute, they had killed their way into the enemy's camp. Following the battle cries, another clear voice rang out. "All the Hans can be spared if you kneel on the ground. Those who stand will be killed without mercy." The voice rang out again and again, causing the entire camp to be able to hear it. When the 30,000 Han civilians heard this, they first panicked. Then the first smart person took the lead and fell to the ground. Out of instinct, the others followed suit and fell to the ground. Although they didn't know what the result would be, they didn't know what else they could do at this moment. Bastards, how dare they? The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is truly despicable. Fan Yuhai's tent was filled with cries. When he heard the battle cries outside, he knew that something was wrong. His first reaction was that Yang Chendong did not care about the lives of the Hans. Otherwise, why would he have the guts to attack? He said that he wanted to save the Hans, but that was just a slogan to show his benevolence. Otherwise, why would he have the courage to start a war? Fan Yuhai kept talking about other people's faults. He didn't even think about it. Was his way of doing things open and above board? In a battle between two armies, he did not think about how to defeat the enemy head-on. Instead, he thought about using despicable methods. He was no longer worthy of being called a famous general. Chapter 578. Quick, gather the cavalry and prepare to retreat. Oh right, inform Li Min and Shen Kuan to make their move. After venting his frustrations, Fan Yuhai quickly regained his composure and gave out orders. The attack of the mercenaries was too sudden, to the point that he did not have the time to prepare properly. Based on his intuition, the outcome of this battle was already decided. Since they were going to lose, then the most important thing was to preserve their strength. The other troops could be abandoned, but the 5,000 cavalrymen could not be left here. With the speed of their war horses, they could definitely retreat safely. Under Fan Yuhai's orders, the 5,000 cavalrymen quickly gathered and protected Fan Yuhai as they left the camp. They did not even turn back to Sangnu City, but turned and fled in another direction. It was obvious that he knew his place. He knew that a single city would not be able to stop the powerful mercenaries. At the moment when he led the cavalrymen to retreat, over 100 figures headed in the opposite direction. The leaders were Li Min and Shen Kuan. They had a more important mission to complete. Compared to Fan Yuhai's decisiveness, Sang Wang-Le's reaction was slower. When he was woken up from his sleep and was told that the mercenaries were coming, he did not escape immediately. Instead, he ordered his men to launch a counterattack. At the same time, he arranged for the captive Han people to be brought over. He wanted to kill the Han people in front of the mercenaries, to kill until the other party was terrified and had no choice but to retreat. It was a beautiful dream, but reality was a blow to people. Sang Wang-La had forgotten how strong the enemy was, and how he had successfully infuriated the other party when he forced them to retreat earlier in the day. Once the order was given, how likely was it to be executed? The second and third cold vanguard was like a ferocious tiger, stabbing into the heart of the enemy like a pair of sharp blades. After facing a little resistance, they managed to rescue 4 groups of Han people, each group having about 1,000 Han people. These captive Han people were like livestock, their movements fixed by a few wooden stakes. Even when the cold vanguard arrived, they did not dare to break through the stakes. Just from this point, they were a bunch of zombies without any fighting spirit. Fortunately, not only were these people obedient to the enemy, they were also obedient to the mercenaries. When the slogans were heard, each and every one of them lay on the ground, trembling. It was as if they wouldn't get up even if they were beaten to death. This allowed them to dodge the bullets flying in all directions, ensuring their safety to the greatest extent. Some of the enemies were still threatening, and even killing a few people, trying to force them to stand up. However, it was all in vain. Facing the Han people who were already scared out of their wits, their words did not have any effect. Even if they waved the butcher's knife, they would only kill a few hostages who did not dare to resist. When they realized that the Han people could no longer be used as hostages, and the mercenaries were advancing faster and faster, the Lansong soldiers had no choice but to retreat. Without hostages, the mercenaries could unleash 100% of their strength, and were not afraid of the enemy's counterattack. In the middle of the army, Sang Wang-La took the initiative to enter the battlefield, leading his personal guards to command the 100,000 Lansong workers who were woken up from their sleep to use the catapults to launch a counterattack. General, our soldiers are currently fighting with the mercenaries. If the rocks fall, it will injure the enemy and also our own brothers. One of the captains saw that the enemy was about to attack indiscriminately and anxiously came up to console him. Scram! It is our soldiers' glory to be able to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Men, throw the rocks, throw them. Sang Wenla already knew that Fan Yuhai had escaped with the cavalry, and at this moment, he was incomparably furious. Does the world think that the mercenaries are invincible? Then I will use my strength to defeat them, and tell the world that the Lansong soldiers are the strongest. The 100,000 workers came to the front of the catapults and pushed the rocks that were prepared during the day over. Then the rocks flew into the air. It looked like a huge commotion. However, in the dark night, without any professional training, the catapults had no accuracy at all. They just hit wherever they hit. The rocks flew in all directions and whistled past everyone's heads before smashing into the ground, creating a huge pit. It created a huge pressure on the soldiers on the battlefield. They are really vicious, even smashing their own people. Quick, charge with me. As long as we reach the front of the catapults, these things will be useless. Wu Sheng saw a huge rock fly past his head and smash a dozen meters behind him. He couldn't help but grin and suck in a breath of cold air. Then he quickly made a decision and ordered the army to speed up. The huge rocks gave the mercenaries a huge amount of pressure. At the same time, it also gave pressure to the Lansong soldiers and the 40,000 soldiers that Fan Yuhai had abandoned. When they saw the falling rocks, they originally wanted to rely on their numbers to fight it out with the mercenaries. But now they turned and ran. What kind of joke was this? These rocks did not have eyes at all. Before they could even see the mercenaries, they would be smashed to death by the rocks. How unlucky would that be? Sang Wenla, who had originally wanted to use the catapults to turn the situation around, did not know that his actions had caused the army at the front to crumble. The charging mercenaries did not meet with the crazy resistance that they had imagined, and they were getting closer and closer to the enemy. The 2nd Regiment and 3rd Regiment were like two sharp knives. The 20 battalions of auxiliary soldiers were like a huge net, pushing forward from behind. The 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries were at the back, constantly rescuing the Han civilians and dealing with the small groups that had slipped through the net. At this point, it was worth mentioning that the 2 million silvers were not spent in vain. Under the instructions of Grand Tutor Long Chi, although they managed to obtain the Lansong weapons, they were only half-finished products. When they encountered the incoming Vietnamese mercenaries, they got into formation and engaged in battle. Only then did they discover that the blades and spears in their hands had been broken into two after just a few clashes. The weakness of their weapons dealt a heavy blow to the Lansong soldiers. How could they be a match for steel blades and spears with their bare hands? Thus, many of the Lansong soldiers died with hatred. They did not lose in terms of battle strength, nor did they lose in terms of courage. Instead, they lost in terms of logistics. The speed of the 2 cold vanguard regiments was too fast. Everyone seemed to be holding their breaths as they advanced at lightning speed. Whenever they met with resistance, they would open fire without hesitation, not giving the enemy a chance to get close. In just an hour, they had broken through the front line and arrived at the center of the camp. The arrival of the Cold Vanguard Regiment was like a hot knife through butter. They arrived in front of the trebuchets, killing the Lansong soldiers and causing them to flee in all directions. Even General Sang Wenla was forced to retreat to Sangnu City under the protection of his personal guards. There were still 50,000 soldiers left behind to guard the city. No matter what, they still had the strength to fight. After charging for over a dozen li, they entered the middle camp from the enemy's front camp, then into the back camp. The Cold Vanguard Regiment was unstoppable. This time, the combat strength that they displayed made the enemy unable to help but change their opinion of them once again. Awesome! Seeing the enemy being forced back to Sangnu City, other than his beloved comrades, there was a group of prisoners kneeling on the ground. The 3rd Regiment commander Wu Sheng could not help but howl to the sky. However, he also fell to the ground with a plop. At the same time, he was also really tired. After chasing the enemy for over a dozen li, the sky had just turned bright. In other words, they had run so far in just 6 hours. Not to mention running for over a dozen li, they had to keep charging and facing all kinds of problems. Normally, it would be difficult for the Cold Vanguard Regiment to do this. This time, It was because of the strong morale of the soldiers and the anger that they had suppressed previously that they were able to achieve this result. Commander Wuxia did not know that all of this was within Yang Chendong's calculations. He knew better than anyone else whether the Han civilians would appear or not. Thus, he had no choice but to retreat during the day and suddenly charge back at night. The officers requesting to fight was also part of his plan. This way, not only could he offset the fact that the enemy had hostages, he could also stimulate the fighting spirit of the outstanding soldiers. It was truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. No, it should be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Because these officers were the ones who requested to fight first, he reluctantly agreed to send out troops. This way, even if there were more casualties among the Han hostages, no one would blame him. This was the unanimous opinion of all the officers, and he was just pushing the boat along. Perhaps some people would think that this was the mentality of a careerist. But since ancient times, how could there be no casualties? War was never a case of you advancing and I retreating, and I advancing and you retreating. There would always be all kinds of benefits and problems. For example, the 36 stratagems of the art of war, a battle of wills and courage, you plotting against me, and I plotting against you. On the other hand, history was always written by the victors. No matter how well you did things, once you lost, it was inevitable that others would say that you were pedantic. On the other hand, as long as you did not use 2 heaven-defying methods to win, others would say that you were wise, smart, or even great. This was history. This was the so-called true history that future generations could see. And right now, Yang Chendong had won. He was undoubtedly great. But what others did not know was that this great person was currently experiencing a life and death crisis. Li Min Shenkuan. One was the adopted son of the former king of Jiaoji, the other was a high-level assassin sent by Baiming. Originally, these 2 people had nothing to do with each other. Even their lifelines would not be tangled in the slightest. However, because of a common goal, they actually joined forces, and that goal was to kill Yang Chendong. Chapter 579. One was for revenge, and the other was for precaution. Under Fan Yuhai's persuasion, the 2 of them came together. Then, they each led their men who had been trained for many years. When the mercenaries launched an all-out attack in the middle of the night, they bypassed the main army and quietly headed to the rear where Yang Chendong might be hiding. In this battle, in order to achieve the goal of severely injuring the Lansong soldiers and the Jiaoji remnants in one fell swoop, Yang Chendong sent out all his men. Not only did he send out the 2 main regiments, 20 auxiliary battalions, 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries, even the Wolf Fong Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team, who were hidden in the dark, were all sent out. It was just to increase the bargaining chip and obtain a greater victory. In this way, Yang Chendong's security force was only left with 60 members of the 1st and 2nd Guard squads. But even so, no one felt that there was any problem. Not to mention that they were originally at the rear of the army. The enemy had no time to deal with the attacks of the mercenaries, so why would anyone come find trouble with them? With the presence of the 1st and 2nd Guard squads, who could rush into the headquarters and hurt Yang Chendong. No one had such strength, so this time, even Tiger Man, who had always been cautious, did not say that he would leave any troops behind to strengthen the young master's security force when he saw the army move out one by one. Now that the battle was the priority, one more person left behind would mean one less force on the battlefield. In the big picture, he would not do this. No one thought that there would be any danger, but the danger really did appear. That was when Yang Chendong stood in front of the sand table, constantly listening to the battle reports from the reconnaissance battalion in front. Just as he was practicing the battle between the 2 sides, gunshots suddenly rang out from outside. What's going on? Without needing Yang Chendong to ask, Beta Persei immediately walked out. As the 6th young master's inseparable shadow, his existence had always been detached from the rest. Among the 5 guards of the Yang family, he was also ranked the highest. This was also because his responsibility was to ensure the safety of the 6th young master. This task was originally sacred and noble. Second brother, someone is approaching us and has been discovered. Now we have sent people to chase after them. The captain of the first guard squad, Chiovi, flashed out from the darkness and repeated what had just happened. Be careful. Beta Persei nodded. He just thought that some stragglers had accidentally entered here. However, his duty still made him say this very seriously. Don't worry, second brother. Chiovi nodded his head. Although he was a little older than Beta Persei, in terms of duty, especially in the heart of the sixth young master, he was obviously not as important as Beta Persei. It was not a loss to call him second brother. Beta Persei returned to the command center. When he saw Tiger's Mane's questioning gaze, he gently shook his head, indicating that it was not a big deal. After Tiger's Mane gave him a reassuring look, he followed behind Yang Chendong and inserted flags everywhere on the sand table. Bang bang bang. Several gunshots rang out again. This time, the sound seemed to be a little clearer. Beta Persei's figure flashed out again, but not long after he walked back. There were still small groups of enemies appearing, but it was not a big deal. Tiger's Mane continued to assist the sixth young master in completing the military situation analysis on the sand table, but then the third wave of gunshots rang out. This time, without waiting for Beta Persei to rush out of the command center, Tiger's Mane was the first to walk out. If the first time was a coincidence, the second time was an accident, then what was the third time? If it was too much of a coincidence, then it was not a coincidence. Someone had done it on purpose. Soon, Tiger's Mane walked back to the command center, but at this moment his face was not looking good. When he noticed that Yang Chendong was looking at him, he knew that he had to tell the truth. He lowered his head and said, Young master, some unknown enemies suddenly appeared outside. They are like ghosts. They come and go without a trace. 3 of our team members have been injured. Injured? Did you catch the culprit? Yang Chendong was surprised when he heard this. He was well aware of the strength of the guard squad. Putting aside the fact that their training requirements were already higher than the most elite of the cold front, just the sparring sessions with him had already shown how much they had improved. For someone to be able to injure them, and even injure 3 of them in one go, it was only natural that they would be shocked. Tiger's Mane, who was questioned by Yang Chendong, looked a little bitter. After a moment of hesitation, he replied, Our brothers are incompetent. We didn't catch the culprit. They were too fast, and the team members didn't dare to chase after them. They were afraid that they would be lured away. We didn't catch them. This time, Yang Chendong raised his eyebrows, but soon he laughed out loud. Interesting, interesting. It seems that this is a force to be reckoned with. What about the young master? Although Yang Chendong was laughing, Tiger's Mane knew that he was laughing out of anger. How could the master laugh happily when his team members were injured? What do we do? Of course, we hit them. We can't let them act tough in front of us. How about this? If they come again, let the team members chase after them. They can hide for a while in the dark, but I don't believe that they can hide forever. If you see any suspicious targets, shoot. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets, Yang Chendong said fiercely. His smile had long since disappeared. Yes. Tiger's Mane naturally wouldn't disobey Yang Chendong's suggestion. However, there was still a problem, so he asked, Young master, how many people should we send out at once? Let's send out the entire second guard team first. Yang Chendong replied after pondering for a moment. If he sent out too few people, he was afraid that they would fall into the enemy's ambush. The gains would not make up for the losses. The entire second squad had 30 people, and they were used to cooperating with each other. Even if they faced enemies 10 times more than them, there wouldn't be any problems. With the advantage of guns, they could still retreat if they couldn't win. As soon as he heard that the entire second squad would be sent out, Tiger's Mane hesitated for a moment and said, Young master, isn't it too much? Not much, not much. The first time we send out the second squad, if there are still people coming, it proves that the enemy's strength and numbers won't be too small. Then we'll send out the first squad as well. After saying this, Yang Chendong glanced at Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. He wanted to send out the 2 of them as well. After all, the enemy's goal must be to target him. And if there wasn't a good enough opportunity, they wouldn't easily appear. Therefore, it was best not to leave anyone around him to ensure that he could lure out the killer. However, he also knew that even if he said so, the two of them would not agree. Other things could be discussed, but when it came to their own safety, they would not execute it even if they were beaten to death. Being able to withdraw the two guard squads was already the biggest concession they could make. Tiger's Mane didn't know that Yang Chendong wanted to send him out, because even if the first guard team was sent out, he would have already jumped to his feet. No, absolutely not. Looking at Tiger's Mane's desperate look, Yang Chendong was moved, but he pretended to be angry and said, "What? You're the young master, and I'm the young master. If I say it's okay, then it's okay. Beta Persei, beat him up." Okay. Beta Persei naturally followed Yang Chendong's lead. As long as it was the young master's order, he would completely carry it out, never caring whether it was right or wrong. Therefore, at this moment he smiled and clenched his fists. There was a creaking sound as he stretched his muscles and bones. Tiger's Mane's strength was originally on par with Beta Persei. One was agile, and the other was strong. However, Beta Persei's fists were really not to be trifled with. Once he got hit, it would definitely not feel good. Unless it was a battle of life and death, Tiger's Mane would usually be at a disadvantage in a contest like this. The enemy was right beside him, and no one knew what would happen next. If he was injured at this time, it might delay the important matters. A wise man knows when to retreat. For the sake of the overall situation, Tiger's Mane finally chose to give in. Okay, don't do it. I'll listen to your orders. Okay, Beta Persei, I'll spare him this time. Luckily you know what's good for you. Otherwise, I would have sent you out too, Yang Chendong said. After he said this, he could see Tiger's Mane's unyielding expression. Obviously, sending out the first guard team was already his limit. Unless he was killed, he would never agree to transfer him out too. Although he had now agreed to Yang Chendong's request, Tiger's Mane still had hope in his heart. Perhaps sending out the second guard team would be enough, and the enemy would not come again. Such thoughts were destined to be disappointed. Just 10 minutes after the second guard team was sent out, gunshots were heard again. The enemies hiding in the dark had made their move again, and there were quite a few of them. As Yang Chendong said before, they saw the hope of luring the tiger away from the mountain. This time they should have put in a lot of effort. Young master, please reconsider. Tiger's Mane, who was in the command center, did not immediately execute the order. Instead, he still held a glimmer of hope as he spoke to Yang Chendong. Go, follow the order just now. Yang Chendong waved his hand casually. This time the enemy's target was obviously him. Although it was said that as long as he could restrain his temper, it would be very difficult for the enemy to kill him. However, he did not like the feeling of being on guard against the enemy at all times. He preferred to take the initiative to attack and strangle all dangers in the cradle. Since the other party was determined to kill him, he would fulfill the other party's wish and send everyone out to lure them out. Sigh. With a sigh, Tiger's Mane knew that the result could not be changed. He could only reluctantly walk out of the command center. At this moment, Yang Chendong's voice came from behind him. Don't play tricks. Otherwise, even if you can fool the young master, you won't be able to fool the enemy. You understand? Chapter 580. Tiger's Man couldn't help but pause. Originally, he wanted to leave some people behind in the dark. Although he believed that with just him and Beta Persei around, no matter how many people came, it would be difficult to get past them and reach the young master. But wouldn't it be better to leave one more person behind? But now that Yang Chendong added on, he finally calmed down. That's right. To be able to cause the security squad to be somewhat helpless, one could imagine the strength and combat strength of the enemy. If you want to leave someone behind without being discovered by them, that would be even more impossible. Tiger's Man walked out of the headquarters with his head lowered. He called the captain of the first guard team, Chiu V. Captain Chiu, if the enemy appears again, can you go and destroy them? Tiger's Man's murderous aura overflowed as he said these words. It was obvious that he was really angered by these killers who seemed to be everywhere. The enemies were difficult to deal with because they relied on the darkness and were very agile. Once they were discovered, those people would immediately retreat frantically. However, the guard team could only stay in place due to their duties. Naturally, they would suffer a little. However, Chou immediately regained his confidence when he heard that they could chase after the enemy. He patted his chest and said like a soldier, "Who too, if you let us out, I guarantee that we can kill those shameful bastards until they cry for their parents. None of them will be left alive." "Okay, then if the enemy appears to harass us later, you guys will chase after them and kill them. Remember, you must end the battle quickly. Also, send out the first guard team." Tiger's man was a little reluctant when he said this. When Chiovi heard that he could go out and kill the enemy, he was so happy that he was about to agree. But when he suddenly heard that he was going to send them all out, he couldn't help but be stunned. "If we send them all out, who will be responsible for the safety of the sixth young master?" That's exactly what the young master meant. He was worried that it would be dangerous if too few people went out, so he sent everyone out. "Naturally, Beta Persei and I will be responsible for the safety here. If you're really worried, then go and come back quickly. This is a military order. Execute it." After saying this, Tiger's man turned around and walked towards the command center. He was worried that he would change his mind if he stayed any longer. Although he had never disobeyed Yang Qindong's orders, for some reason, he couldn't help but do it this time. Chiovi was left standing on the spot with a dumbfounded expression. With his intelligence, he quickly realized that this must be the sixth young master's plan to lure the snake out of its hole. When he recalled how the sixth young master had toyed with the security team, he couldn't help but say, "With the sixth young master's ability, there shouldn't be anyone who can hurt him. But for safety's sake, I should finish this quickly and come back to support him." As if he had made a decision, Chiovi began to assemble the first security team. After a while, gunshots rang out from outside again, and then they went further and further away. In the command center, when gunshots rang out again, Tiger's man walked out of the door alone. Then, he held a tri-edge bayonet in his hand and stood there like an ordinary guard. He knew very well that when masters fought, the ability of the gun in their hands was limited. Even at close range, the enemy would not give you any chance to shoot. Since that was the case, it was safer to just hold the bayonet. Beta Persei did not leave. He stood guard in the inner door of the command center, and did not take anything. This was because his weapon was a pair of iron fists. In addition, he was tall and strong to begin with. At this time, he stood there like a door god. On the other hand, Yang Qindong did not seem to take what was happening outside seriously. He was still standing in front of the sand table, looking at the situation of both sides and imagining what the front line had become. 500 meters away from the command center, 10 black figures were slowly approaching. They were all dressed in black and walked in the dark. Their footsteps were extremely light, and their speed was very fast. Even the night vision goggles could not capture their figures. "You sent them all out? Hee, this loyal duke is really young and full of vigor. He is very arrogant," a black-clothed man said, and the corners of his mouth revealed a creepy smile. "That's right, he is indeed very arrogant. However, since he doesn't put us in his eyes, he can only suffer the consequences of his own actions. Brother Shin, this time, our names will go down in history." Another black-clothed man chuckled coldly. If the king of Jiaoji, Li Li, was here, he would definitely recognize that the person who spoke was his adopted son, Li Min, who was known as the top master in Jiaoji. As for the brother Shin he was talking about, it was naturally the messenger sent by Baiming, Shin Kuan. The situation at the front line was not satisfactory. The mercenaries suddenly turned around and attacked. They did not cherish the lives of the Han people during the day. This indeed caught Fan Yuhai off guard. However, this also gave the two of them an opportunity. They led their most elite subordinates through the edge of the battlefield, and arrived at the rear. When they thought of the possibility of meeting the Ming dynasty's loyal duke, and even killing him, the two of them could not help but feel their blood boil. However, they were disappointed to see that there were dozens of guards here. Moreover, each of them had extraordinary skills. The aura they exuded was even stronger than ordinary martial artists. No matter how confident Li Min and Shin Kuan were, They could not guarantee that they could break through these guards and arrive in front of Yang Qindong. However, if they were to leave just like that, they would be unwilling to do so. This was why they constantly harassed and even injured people with arrows in their sleeves. Originally, they wanted to annoy Yang Qindong. If he hid in his shell like a coward and did not come out, then they would continuously attack him. Even if they could not hurt him, they would make him angry. Perhaps the opportunity would come when he was angry. However, they did not expect that after just 3 rounds of harassment, these guards would actually rush out. This sudden turn of events made Li Li and Shen Kuan very agitated. They tried to send a group of people to lure these guards further and further away, and then sent a second group of people to test the waters. Sure enough, these guards rushed out again. They counted a total of 60 people. In other words, the loyal duke should not have any forces around him. So it was time for them to make a move. This was definitely an opportunity, although it looked more like a trap. But no matter what, they had to take a gamble, because if they did not gamble now, they were afraid that it would be very difficult to find such an opportunity in the future. So they appeared. After leaving more than a dozen people in the periphery responsible for restraining the guards who might come back at any time, each of them took 4 of their most elite subordinates and appeared. All of you listen carefully. In a while, we will attack with all our might. We don't need to kill the enemy immediately. Just keep the 2 of them occupied. We don't have much time. Those brothers lured the guards away with the determination to die. At most, we have the time for an incense stick to burn. If we still don't succeed, we will retreat immediately and look for another opportunity. Li Min was the one who spoke. As he spoke, the corners of his mouth twitched. His heart ached for Yang Qindong. The people he brought with him this time were all experts who had followed him for many years. They could be considered as men of sacrifice. These people risked their lives to lure away the guards in order to create enough opportunities for them. When he thought of the possibility of killing Yang Qindong, and the possibility that his men would not be able to survive, he felt as if his heart had been cut by a knife. At this moment, he hated Yang Qindong even more. He believed that all the results were caused by this person. This was what it meant to condemn someone. When a person always wants to harm others, and therefore has to pay some price, they will still put the blame on the victim. Do they have to think that when they want to harm others, others should stand there and let them be cut into pieces? Is that the right thing to do? At the entrance of the headquarters, Tiger's Mane had already extinguished the torch inserted here. He stood in the darkness, opened up his 5 senses, and carefully and cautiously observed everything around him. If he alone could eliminate the assassins who came out of nowhere, young master would not have to take the risk. This was naturally the best outcome. So at this moment, Tiger's Mane was full of fighting spirit and murderous intent. His whole body was focused, waiting for the enemy to appear. Whoosh! A small arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness, aiming at the position where Tiger's Mane was standing. In the darkness, the direction of the arrow could not be seen at all. Only a murderous aura appeared in the air. The previous guard was injured by this sudden arrow because of his carelessness. However, if they wanted to use the same method to deal with Tiger's Mane, it was obviously not enough. Tiger's Mane suddenly jumped to the side, feeling the danger, and dodged the attack. At the same time, as he fell to the ground, his roar spread in all directions. "Who are you? You only know how to plot against me." Just as the words left his mouth and his body came into close contact with the ground, for saber cheese suddenly slashed towards him from different directions. Ding ding dang dang. In that moment, Tiger's Mane's military knife collided with the 4 steel swords. The 4 assassins suddenly appeared, suddenly attacked, and suddenly attacked, in order to injure Tiger's Mane in the shortest time possible. Since he was able to stand guard outside the command center, his skills must not be simple. Perhaps this was what the Duke of Loyalty relied on. Thinking about it, if he killed this pillar of support, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's expression would be very good. Although the 4 assassins thought highly of Tiger's Mane's ability and attacked with all their strength, they still did not injure the opponent. Instead, Tiger's Mane stood up like a carp and laughed. "So it's 4 reckless dogs, bark. Watch me take your lives." Tiger's Mane would not shout for no reason. This was to remind young master in the headquarters that 4 enemies had appeared. Chapter 581. The military knife in his hand shone with a cold light. In an extremely short period of time, Hu Meng had exchanged more than 10 blows with the 4 of them. He had also slowly changed from his initial arrogance to defense. The strength of these 4 people was too strong, especially when they were using a joint attack technique. When the 2 of them worked together, they were able to exert a combat power that was several times higher than their own strength. If it was one-on-one, Tiger's Mane was confident that he could take down any one of them within 10 moves. However, in the face of a joint attack technique and 4 opponents at that, he was a little overwhelmed and had no choice but to switch from attacking to defending. In the command center, the sound of weapons colliding could be heard from outside. Beta Persei, who was standing there, felt his heart throb. Obviously, he was affected by the murderous aura outside, and could not help but feel his hands and feet itch. Go help Tiger's Mane. I can feel that the people who are coming are not weak. Yang Chendong finally stopped looking at the sand table, and said to Beta Persei very seriously, "Young master, I have to protect your safety." Beta Persei also knew the urgency of the situation, and even knew what his mission was. This was one of the rare occasions when Beta Persei obeyed orders, and did not carry out them. He looked at Yang Chendong with amusement. "Well, don't you know the strength of the young master? You have to have confidence in your young master. Go." Yang Chendong chuckled. Oh, it was unknown if Yang Chendong's smile had infected Beta Persei, or if he really had great confidence in the strength of the young master. After agreeing, Beta Persei pulled open the curtain of the command center and rushed out. "Tiger's Mane, you're too weak. Let me help you. Get lost. Go back and protect the young master. You're not needed here." Even though Tiger's Mane had already been forced back a few steps, his voice still rang out like a roar. Unfortunately, Beta Persei came under the orders of the 6th young master. How could he care about Tiger's Mane? He roared and rushed into the battle, instantly sharing the firepower and attracting the attention of the other 2 players. Because of this, Tiger's Mane's pressure was reduced. Finally, he no longer had to retreat and defend passively. He could now consider counterattacking and killing the enemy. However, before they could start their counterattack, another 4 shadowy figures jumped out and surrounded them. There were a total of 8 of them, and this was the last of Shen Kuan's strength. With another 4 people joining in, it was now 2 against 8. Naturally, the pressure was not small. Fortunately, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei often worked together over the years, especially when dealing with Yang Chendong. They had formed a tacit understanding. In addition, Beta Persei was still a little better than Tiger's Mane in terms of skill. Although it was only a little, it could often determine the final outcome. Whoosh! While they were fighting happily, 2 more shadowy figures suddenly appeared, and rushed to the command center. They were the leaders of this assassination, Li Min and Shen Kuan. They were both absolute masters and had reached the ability to identify people by breathing. After they knew that there was only a single breath in the command center, they knew that the best opportunity had come. They rushed in without hesitation. Unlike outside, there were a few kerosene lamps lit in the command center, making it as bright as day. Therefore, when Li Min and Shen Kuan rushed in, they couldn't help but squint their eyes to adapt to the environment. When they saw that Yang Chendong was indeed the only one there, the 2 of them laughed mischievously. While they were laughing, Yang Chendong was also laughing. "Both of you, I'm Yang Chendong, the Great Ming's loyal duke. May I know your name? Do you want to know our names and origins and then take revenge afterwards? Let me tell you, no way." A sneer flashed across Shen Kuan's face. Although he didn't think that Yang Chendong could still live past today, who knew if the other party still had any tricks up his sleeve? If he reported his name and word got out, wouldn't it be a pile of shit whether he killed him or not? Shen Kuan had no intention of reporting his name. He just wanted to complete the mission as soon as possible. He even couldn't help but attack. However, Li Min reached out and stopped him. Then he looked at Yang Chendong with an arrogant expression and said, "A real man doesn't change his name or surname. I'm Li Min, the adopted son of the king of Jiaoji. He's Shen Kuan, Baiming's special envoy. Brother Li Yu. Shen Kuan didn't expect Li Min to sell him out directly. Anger appeared on his face. Brother Shen, don't be angry. Do you think that he can still escape from the joint attack of the two of us? Even if he has some tricks up his sleeve, no one can save him at such a close distance. Don't worry. Li Min smiled at Shen Kuan and looked at Yang Chendong again. She said in a condescending manner, "Promise me one thing and I'll let you die quickly so you won't have to suffer so much." Condition? Let's hear it. Yang Chendong had a curious look on his face. Immediately write an order to release my adopted father and allow him to establish a new kingdom. Li Min's voice was very firm, as if he was ordering something. Just now, Yang Chendong was still curious as to how the other party had exposed his identity. His question was just a casual thought. He didn't think that the other party would really reveal his identity and origin. Only now did he understand that Li Min still had the idea of helping her foster father, Li Li, restore the country. Ha 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 ha. Yang Chendong couldn't help but laugh loudly after knowing Li Min's thoughts. What are you laughing at? Li Min was very confused by Yang Chendong's expression, who was about to die. I'm laughing at your idiocy. Yang Chendong seemed to be holding back his laughter as he spoke. Then his expression suddenly turned serious, and he said in a questioning tone with a trace of pressure, "You're just an assassin who can't see the light of day. What right do you have to order me? A duke of the great Ming dynasty. Do you have the right?" With a loud shout, Li Min involuntarily took 3 steps back before coming to a stop. Then, her face was filled with anger and murderous intent. He was the #1 expert of the Jiaoji kingdom, but he actually took 3 steps back because of Li Min's angry shout. If this spread out, wouldn't he be laughed at by others? At this moment, his killing intent when he looked at Yang Chendong was even stronger. Good, you dare to laugh at me. I hope you can still maintain this backbone and be so stubborn when I capture you. Bullshit expert. You only know how to talk. If you want to fight, then come. Yang Chendong's face didn't have the slightest trace of fear. If it wasn't because he wanted to know who wanted to deal with him, if it wasn't because he didn't want to be on the lookout for thieves every day, did these two people think they could meet him? Did they really think that he was some kind of powerful figure? Li Min was infuriated by Li Min's disdain. His gaze turned cold, and he opened his mouth to spit out the word kill. Another person was even faster than him and rushed towards Yang Chendong. He was Shen Kuan. Since his identity had been exposed, he had to kill Yang Chendong today. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would bring an unimaginable disaster to Baiming. A cold light flashed, and a sword light went straight for Li Min's throat. As expected of the nickname of the 13 swords, Shen Kuan used a killing move as soon as he attacked. He didn't have the intention to hold Li Min hostage. The sword light swept over. If he really succeeded, then Li Min's life would be gone forever. Yang Chendong calmly looked at the scene. He calculated the distance between the tip of the sword and his throat in his mind. At this time he could use at least 3 ways to avoid the attack. However, he didn't do so. He wanted to see how powerful his opponent was. He wanted to find a way to stimulate the qi in his body so that it could be used and played better. It was often the easiest to break through between life and death. Clang! A blade light suddenly appeared and blocked the advance of the long sword, forcing it to stop half a meter in front of Yang Chendong. F***ck. Yang Chendong was thinking of using the battle of life and death to sharpen and stimulate himself. He didn't expect that someone would come out of nowhere and disrupt his steps. He couldn't help but feel very depressed. The person who attacked was naturally Li Min. With a horizontal strike of her blade, she blocked the attack of the longsword. However, because of this, anger appeared on Shen Kuan's face. Li Min, why did you stop me? Wait a minute. I haven't asked him to write the military order yet. He can't die. Li Min shook his head. Although he said that he wanted to negotiate, his face was very firm. Shen Kuan wanted to scold him for being an idiot. However, considering that he was no match for him, he could only snort coldly and stand aside. From the looks of it, it was clear that Li Min was going to take control of the situation. Just now when he attacked, Yang Chendong stood there like a fool and didn't move at all. This gave the two killers incomparable confidence. This Yang Chendong was really a scholar who couldn't even trust a chicken. Li Min naturally saw Yang Chendong's performance just now. Now she was very confident. She looked at Yang Chendong with a look of charity and said, I said, write the military order immediately. Otherwise, not only will you die, but you will also die very miserably. TSK. As if you won't kill me if I write it. Yang Chendong snorted and looked very clear. Duke of Loyalty, you have to know that there are several kinds of death. One kind is called living a life worse than death. I don't know if you want to have a taste of it. Li Min threatened again. At the same time, she admired Yang Chendong's performance in her heart. He was worthy of being called the god of war. At least this kind of determination was something that few people could match. I don't want to, Yang Chendong said without any surprise. This also made Li Min's eyes flash with pride. Just when she thought that she had scared the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong suddenly said, Who do you think you are? Can you really hurt me? It's better to kneel down and surrender now. Maybe I can give you a quick death if I'm happy. Otherwise, I think you don't want to taste the feeling of living a life worse than death. Chapter 582. What? He originally thought that the other party had given in, but unexpectedly, the other party began to threaten him. Li Min, who thought that he had misheard, widened his eyes in disbelief. On the other hand, Shen Kuan clearly heard the words just now. Although he did not know where Yang Chendong's confidence came from, he did not mind him repeating the words just now. Brotherly, he wants you to learn from a dog and kneel on the ground and beg for surrender. Do you really not want to live anymore? Li Min's face was flushed red. Obviously, he was very angry. The veins on his right hand that was holding the knife suddenly popped out. He looked like he was going to kill someone at any time. Shen Kuan's words had provoked him to the point that he wanted to kill someone. TSK. As if you said that you won't do anything to me. Yang Chendong rolled his eyes and said as if he was joking. Very well, then I will kill and cut off your legs. Anyway, I don't need them to write. Li Min, who had been successfully enraged, decided to give Yang Chendong a taste of his strength first. Anyway, he did not intend to let the other party die so easily. He would slowly torture him. He raised his right hand, and the knife was like a gust of wind, directly chopping towards Yang Chendong's legs. Li Min did not intend to hold back this time. This was originally a game of life and death. Whoever had a merciful heart did not deserve to play this game of death. Shen Kuan watched from the side. Yang Chendong, who had lost his legs, could no longer pose any threat to Bai Ming. After all, have you ever seen a powerful person who did not even have legs? How could such a person be qualified to compete for the world's hegemony? Under the gaze of both sides, Yang Chendong, who seemed to be dead for sure, smiled at this moment. Did he really think that he was a soft persimmon? Did he think that he could teach him a lesson with a knife? Well, then he would use facts to prove that anyone who dared to look down on him would have to pay a heavy price, or even lose their lives. Even before the saber arrived, it brought with it a wave of saber energy. If an ordinary person were to face this saber attack, they would be scared silly. Li Min and Shen Kuan were also looking forward to seeing Yang Chendong's stupefied expression. However, they were destined to be disappointed. Just as the blade was about to reach his legs, the sixth young master leaped into the air, and easily dodged the blade. While he was still in mid-air, he executed a divine dragon tail whip. His feet, which were clad in military boots, smashed towards Li Min's shoulder like a huge rock. Feeling the power of this kick, Li Min's expression changed greatly. He had a feeling that if this kick landed, his shoulder blade would be completely shattered. At the critical moment, he hurriedly retreated, wanting to avoid this heavy blow. As expected of the number one expert in the Jiaoji kingdom, Li Min's reaction was as quick as a fox, causing the huge foot to miss. Just as he was about to stabilize his body, he was drenched in cold sweat. Another kick was aimed at his face. Bang! The heavy blow landed on his face like a ruthless slap. Under the force of the kick, Li Min's entire body spun 360 degrees, and then fell to the ground with a thud. Chain kick. Shen Kuan, who originally wanted to watch the show, suddenly spoke up. Then he put away his careless expression and became serious. Wrong, it's 3 consecutive kicks. Both of his feet had already landed on the ground, and he said with a face full of arrogance. Originally, his personality was not that serious. However, due to his position, he had to make some changes. Usually, other than when he was with his wives, he had to pretend to be deep and serious. Now that there were no outsiders around, he could finally be himself for a while. His arrogant and somewhat arrogant side was revealed. The 3 consecutive kicks were the strengthening board of the chain kick. It allowed one to kick 3 times consecutively in an extremely short period of time to achieve the goal of injuring others. This was learned from Wang Yong, who was extremely good at leg techniques. With the existence of the qi, not only was he better at using it than Wang Yong, but the power was also amplified. Pooh! Li Min spat out a mouthful of blood from his mouth, along with 2 teeth. He slowly stood up from the ground. A very obvious footprint was imprinted on Li Min's face, making him look very miserable. Very good. It turns out that we have all underestimated you. Not only did Li Min have such thoughts, Shen Kuan also had the same thoughts. How could someone who could casually kick 3 consecutive kicks be easy to bully? However, he was very curious. When did this person learn martial arts? Ever since Yang Chendong appeared in the capital of Baiming and did a series of big things, everything related to him had been thoroughly investigated by the Imperial Secret Service and the East Faction Guards. However, no matter how he looked at it, this person did not have the time to learn martial arts. It was precisely because the information provided was too comprehensive that they never thought that Yang Chendong knew martial arts. Of course, this was also the result of Baiming not communicating with the Southern Ming Empire. Otherwise, if you asked Guan Ying and the other generals of the Southern Ming Empire, they would immediately give you a clear attitude. Although the fact that Yang Chendong knew martial arts was somewhat out of Shen Kuan's expectations, he immediately understood everything. He could not help but coldly say, "So that's how it is. The reason why you dared to wait for us here alone is because of your martial arts?" Bingo, your answer is correct. It seems that you are not stupid. However, don't your superiors know that if you failed to assassinate me, would Baiming be able to withstand my anger? Yang Chendong gave Shen Kuan a "you are considered smart" expression, then asked a question that the other party could not answer. Since he could not answer, Shen Kuan naturally did not need to answer. He just snorted coldly and looked at Li Min. Originally, his identity was confidential. Even if they wanted to investigate, they would not be able to find any relationship between him and Baiming. However, it was all Li Min's fault. He was too arrogant and exposed his identity. If they could not kill Yang Chendong today, the next unlucky one would be the Southern Ming Empire. Don't look at me like that. Today he will definitely die here. Li Min naturally understood Shen Kuan's intention, but he did not care. He had always been the type to not give up until he achieved his goal. At the same time, he was also a person who would do anything to achieve his goal. Therefore, he had made sufficient preparations. If he did not succeed, he would die for a righteous cause. Li Min said decisively and was even more absolute. This also increased Shen Kuan's desire to silence him. He nodded. Okay, in that case, the 2 of us will work together to kill him. Okay. This time Li Min did not refuse arrogantly. Firstly, there was not much time left for them. Secondly, Yang Chendong had shown a certain level of strength, which was worthy of his attention. See, I told you. The 2 of you should have come together long ago. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't have time to show off. My men are coming back. Yang Chendong was not the slightest bit afraid of the 2 of them working together. On the contrary, he was full of fighting spirit. In the past, when he fought with the guards, he had to leave some leeway and could only give them some minor injuries. How could it be more satisfying than a life-and-death battle now? You will regret it. Seeing Yang Chendong so confident, Li Min's eyes flashed with anger. Then, his figure suddenly rushed forward and the big sword in his hand was swung halfway. On the other side, Shen Kuan also drew a flower with his long sword and passed it to Yang Chendong from the other side. What was different from before was that he also had a sword in his left hand. Now he was using two swords at the same time. Come on. Yang Chendong didn't show the slightest trace of fear, even though he was fighting against two experts by himself. On the contrary, with a loud shout, a military knife appeared in his hand, and he faced the sword and saber head-on. Ding dang dang, ding dang dang. In a very short period of time, the three of them continuously exchanged more than a dozen moves. After that, they separated again and stood in a triangle. Although it was only a dozen moves, Li Min was a little out of breath. In a fight between masters, the slightest difference would often result in a head falling to the ground. Every move required countless calculations in the brain. Compared to Li Min, Shen Kuan's strength was slightly weaker. Hence, his breathing was even more violent. After he stopped, he actually took 3 deep breaths before his complexion once again returned to its ready state. Moreover, when he looked at Yang Chendong, his gaze was a little more cautious. Among the 3 of them, Yang Chendong performed the best. As long as he had the time, he would train with the warriors and constantly increase his own strength. This short exchange of blows did not make him feel anything. It was because he did not feel anything that he looked at Li Min and Shen Kuan with some displeasure. What? Didn't you eat when you came? You want to kill me with these moves? I think you should go back and drink milk from your mother first. Impudent. Hearing Yang Chendong humiliating him like this, Li Min roared and stepped forward again. The strength of the big sword in his hand increased a little, so that when he swung the sword, there was a heavy chi. Li Min was an orphan. He did not know what his mother looked like. Therefore, people who knew him would never mention anything about his parents in front of him. Yang Chendong said it, which naturally made him angry. At this moment, he released all his strength through his arm. Ding ding dang. After just one hit, Yang Chendong felt the military knife in his arm sink. He had to take 2 steps back to avoid the sharp edge, and at the same time, completely dispersing the force. Not bad, this is a little interesting. Knowing that Li Min was using all his strength, Yang Chendong said as he mobilized the chi in his body. Suddenly, his whole body's momentum rose. Once again, Yang Chendong took the initiative to attack. The military knife in his hand was used as a big sword to meet the big sword in Li Min's hand. Ding 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 ding. Using brute force against brute force, the two of them clashed dozens of times in a very short period of time. Finally, Li Min took 5 or 6 steps back and stopped the fight. Fortunately, the quality of the weapons on both sides was quite good. Otherwise, the steel saber would have been broken before the strength was exhausted from the collision. Chapter 583. Li Min's face was pale as he retreated. Just a moment ago, he felt that his right arm was swollen. Now when he tried to lift it, he felt extremely sore. For a long time, he had boasted that he was the strongest and had never met an opponent. But now, the facts had told him that there was always someone stronger than him. And the person who was stronger than him was Yang Chendong. I'll do it. Shen Kuan naturally saw that Li Min had suffered internal injuries. As an ally, he had to do his best. With a loud shout, the long sword in his hand flew towards Yang Chendong like a snake flicking its tongue. When he leaped up, the flying swords in his hands flew out. Then he drew his sword and threw it again. In the blink of an eye, 12 of the 13 swords flew out. The sword net was like a swarm of bees. Yang Chendong first stared at the 12 sword winds seriously. When the sword tips were about to land in front of him, he suddenly thrust the military knife in his hand forward and pointed it straight at the swords. You're courting death. Seeing that Yang Chendong actually pointed casually in the midst of the swords, a cold killing intent flashed across Shen Kuan's face. This was his famous unique skill, the 100 sword fingers. 12 swords formed a net of sword attacks. Even when he faced Li Min before, she could only retreat to avoid the attack. However, when it was Yang Chendong, he did not dodge at all. Wasn't that just courting death? At this moment, Shen Kuan seemed to see Yang Chendong being pierced full of holes by the sword net. At that time, he would return to Baiming with the identity of having successfully assassinated Yang Chendong. If he wasn't a hero, then what was he? From then on, his Shen family's reputation would be glorified because of him. At that time, it was not impossible for him to have a wife and a son. With a smile on his face, he seemed to have seen a beautiful future. However, his body suddenly stopped moving forward. He intuitively felt that the tip of the sword seemed to be blocked. He looked at the sword, and what he saw made him turn pale with fright. His whole body trembled. The tip of the sword was perfectly blocked by the tip of the stiletto. It was as if the two weapons were connected together, and no one could see any gap between them. Shen Kun was really frightened. The other party had not only dodged the attacks of the 12 flying swords with a casual wave of his hand, but he was also able to locate the body of his last sword. He was even able to hit the tip of the sword and successfully block it. What kind of speed did this require? What kind of eyesight? What kind of power? Shen Kun was still shocked. This was something that even Li Min couldn't do. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. He saw his opponent's stiletto circling around in the air, and his sword seemed to be attracted to it as it circled around as well. After a dozen or so rounds, a huge force came and separated the two weapons. At this moment, Shen Kun's arm had been twisted like a fried dough twist. Not to mention that his clothes were torn, even the bones in his arm were exposed. The white bones piercing out of his flesh were very obvious. The miserable state of his arm made Shen Kun involuntarily cry out. He was frightened and in pain. What a ruthless move. Li Min at the side had already adjusted his breathing. The pain in his arm was not as unbearable as before, but when he saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel his whole body go numb. They were humans, not gods. No one would be able to withstand this kind of pain. Not to mention, his right arm was completely crippled. For a swordsman, this was equivalent to having no future. Am I ruthless? Compared to you wanting to take my life, I am already very merciful. Yang Qindong looked at Li Min with a smile, but no matter how one looked at it, there was a murderous aura in that smile. Since Yang Qindong was able to break the 100-finger sword in one move, if he wanted to kill Shen Kun, it wouldn't be easy, but it definitely wouldn't be too difficult. However, he only crippled one of Shen Kun's arms. No matter how one looked at it, it was considered merciful. Don't think that you are really powerful and invincible. I don't believe that no matter how powerful you are, you can't be more powerful than explosives. He seemed to know that he was no match for Yang Qindong in terms of strength. At least it wouldn't be easy for him to kill Shen Kun. Moreover, the scene of the knife versus the military knife just now had already shown him the true strength of Yang Qindong. Since he couldn't win in terms of strength, he would use his ultimate move. This was also Li Min's trump card. As soon as Li Min's voice fell, he tore open the night-traveling clothes in front of him, revealing his chest that was covered in explosives. The explosives were prepared by Fan Yuhai, and Li Min had agreed to it. What he pursued was to succeed or die trying. If he couldn't kill Yang Qindong, then he would just perish together with him. The explosives on his body might not be as powerful as the ones in the warehouse or the military factory, but if they were ignited, it should be no problem to blow up the command center. Yang Qindong's body trembled. Then he shook his head and said slowly, "In order to kill me, you really put in a lot of effort. How is it? Do you no fear now?" After revealing his trump card, Li Min's face became ferocious, and at this moment he also became crazy, as if he was already a winner. "Not bad, it looks very powerful, but in this way, aren't you going to die? Your adoptive father won't be able to restore his country. Is this also your goal? Okay, you don't have to persuade me. Let me tell you, no matter what you say, this time I will definitely die." As for the restoration of the country, as long as you die, General Fan will definitely find a way to save my godfather. Then who can stop them? At this time, Li Min was completely a lunatic. She laughed wildly, not showing the slightest bit of fear because she was about to die. After listening to Li Min's words, Yang Qindong nodded thoughtfully. "Sure enough, your backer is Fan Yuhai. Not bad, no matter what. I know who wants to kill me. Since that's the case, then come, let's see if you can really blow me up." Shen Kun was sent by Baiming, so it was needless to say who his backer was. As for Li Min, was this his own action? Or was there someone supporting him behind the scenes? Now that he had brought up the name of General Fan, The problem was naturally clear. Since the details of both of them were clear, it was time to end the battle. Although this kind of close combat for Yang Chendong could better use his qi and improve his combat power. But since he had a large warehouse in his hand, why would he stupidly use a cold weapon to fight? This was exactly what a wise person would do, playing up one's shortcomings and avoiding one's strengths. Facing Li Min, who was tied with explosives, Yang Chendong's expression was calm, and if one looked carefully, there was even a trace of disdain. After Li Min saw this, it made him even angrier. Although he was an orphan, no matter what he did since he was young, he always strived to be the best. No matter what he did, he could always gain the respect of others. But now he was being looked down upon. What, do you really think I don't dare to detonate the explosives and die with you? Provoked, Li Min laughed maniacally, and then his eyes revealed a crazed look. He pulled the fuse on his body with his arm. Sizzle. Green smoke rose, indicating that the gunpowder had been ignited and was about to explode. Ha ha ha, bold and loyal, so what? You're going to die here, just like a nobody like me. When the time comes, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, what's the difference between us? Li Min, who seemed to have entered a crazed state, laughed maniacally, as if he had gotten what he wanted. As long as he could kill Yang Chendong, Fan Yuhai would have a lot more opportunities, and there would be hope for his godfather to restore Jiaoji. In this way, his death was completely worth it. You're crazy. Shen Kuan, who was half kneeling on the ground, pointed at Li Min with his left hand, his mouth agape. He did not know if his cold sweat was caused by fear, or by the pain caused by Yang Chendong's heavy injury. In order to achieve your goal, you'll do anything. You do have the potential to be a hero. Unfortunately, you've chosen me as your opponent, so you're destined to get nothing, only death. Facing Li Min, whose fuse was getting shorter and shorter, Yang Chendong evaluated him as a winner. Then, a mysterious smile appeared on his face. Following that, he suddenly disappeared from where he stood. No matter how glib your tongue is, you're still going to. Li Min, who was about to mock Yang Chendong, suddenly realized that his opponent had disappeared. Not only that, even his aura had disappeared. He was an assassin, an ace assassin, the #1 expert in Jiaoji. He was confident that Yang Chendong did not use any tricks to hide, just like how Japanese ninjas would use the principle of light refraction to suddenly disappear. But no matter what, that kind of disappearance was only the disappearance of the body, but if one were to sense it carefully, the aura was still there. Moreover, a true expert could kill by tracking the aura. However, Yang Chendong did not even leave behind a trace of his aura. It was as if he had never appeared here in the first place. What's going on? Where is he? Seeing that the fuse was about to be lit, and the target had disappeared, Li Min felt so depressed that he was about to vomit blood. He's not a human, he's a demon. Shen Kuan, who was kneeling on the ground, was also searching for Yang Chendong's aura, but he did not find anything. At this moment he could not help but shout, as if his spirit had been completely destroyed, and he looked like a crazy demon. Boom. Time did not give the two of them a chance to speak again. The explosives were finally ignited, and then it caused a huge explosion. Although the composition of the explosives was not at its strongest state, it was not a problem to flatten the surrounding 5 to 6 meters. Thus, more than half of the command center was destroyed by the impact of the explosives. At the same time, the two high-level assassins, Li Min and Shen Kuan, were also destroyed. Chapter 584. Young Master. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were fighting with the killers outside the headquarters, looked back in shock. Looking at the headquarters that had been mostly destroyed and the loud rumbling in their ears, their eyes turned from black to white and then to red. They had really gone crazy. The young master was like a god in their eyes. The young master was the guiding light of their life, and the young master was their soul. But now that their souls were gone, how could they continue to live? Kill. At this moment, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei burst out at the same time. Facing 4 extremely powerful killers, they all showed their most violent side. and their strength had more than doubled in a short period of time. Speaking of which, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's foundation was not very good. They were not the kind of people who had practiced martial arts since they were young, nor were they martial arts geniuses. Their strength gradually increased because they followed Yang Qindong and were taken care of by him. It's just that this kind of strength was naturally no problem for them to deal with ordinary people, but once they encountered a powerful killer, they seemed a little powerless. This was also the reason why after fighting for a long time, they still couldn't deal with the enemy in front of them, even though they knew that the young master might be in danger. But now it was different. The sound of the explosion was a little too wild. Worried about the safety of the sixth young master, the two burst out, breaking through their own potential and increasing their combat power. If all of this was used on ordinary people, it should be said that they were anxious. When people are anxious, they will have no scruples and their lethality will increase a lot. Originally, they were evenly matched, but now they suddenly burst out, and it was the kind of attack that only killed the enemy and did not defend. Soon the 8 killers that the two were facing fell straight to the ground and died. Of course, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei also had a few more wounds on their bodies. However, the two of them completely ignored it and rushed straight to the command center not far behind them. They wanted to find Yang Qindong. They firmly believed that the young master would be fine. Of course, Yang Qindong would be fine. At the last moment, he entered the big warehouse. It was also the first time he had thought about it. Not only did the warehouse contain hundreds of years of advanced weapons and knowledge, it was also a safe haven. No matter how chaotic the outside world was, this place was as peaceful as ever. After the aftermath of the explosion, Yang Qindong walked out of the big warehouse. He touched the light-colored pentagram on his arm, and couldn't help but feel a myriad of emotions. What kind of fortuitous encounter did he get to own Song? With such a good thing in his hands, shouldn't he do something? Otherwise, wouldn't he be letting down this pentagram and Song's love for him? Young master, young master. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's voices kept ringing. Yang Qindong suppressed the matter of Song in the bottom of his heart, and walked out with a smile. What are you shouting for? Young master is fine. Look at you. It's better for men not to cry. It doesn't look good. That's right, at this moment, Hu Meng and Second Yang had snot and tears running down their faces. For a grown man to cry like this, it was indeed unsightly. When the two saw that Yang Qindong was fine, they couldn't help but rush over in surprise. They touched the sixth young master's body here and there, as if they were afraid that something was missing. Okay, I'm fine. I hid too far away just now. The explosion didn't hurt us, but the command center, and the sand table was blown away. What a pity. Puffed. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei almost spat out their saliva. At this time he was still thinking about the loss of the sand table. Their young master was really careless. What a weirdo. Li Min and Shen Kun were dead, and not even their bones were left. After dealing with these two experts, it didn't take long for the first and second guard teams to withdraw. They loyally completed Yang Qindong's arrangement and chased all the way out, killing all the black-clothed assassins they saw. But when they returned to the camp, they couldn't help but blame themselves. The command center was blown up. Fortunately, the sixth young master was fine. Otherwise, they would have to apologize with their lives. Even if Yang Qindong was fine, the two captains, Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao, still came to apologize. In this regard, Yang Qindong did criticize them. See, there will always be someone stronger than you. Your abilities are still lacking. If it weren't for the young master, my strength is not bad. Wouldn't it be dangerous this time? Just you wait. When this is over, you will train hard for me. When the time comes, whoever complains about being tired will have to leave the guard team and serve in the cold front. In the face of Yang Qindong's reprimand, the two captains obeyed and didn't talk back. They knew that the young master was doing this for their own good. After today's incident, they also decided to train harder. In the future, they must not let today's dangerous incident happen again. Below Sangnu City, the mercenaries were cleaning up the battlefield and surrounding the place. After a night of charging and fighting, the Lansong soldiers were defeated. Of the 50,000 Lansong soldiers, 45,000 Fan Yuhai soldiers escaped with Sang Wenla. Less than 10,000 of them escaped into the city. The rest were either killed or captured. Also captured were the 100,000 laborers of Lansang, as well as 20,000 Han civilians and countless military supplies. The harvest from this battle was bountiful. This battle also showed the might of the mercenaries, which could be seen from the morale of the soldiers. When Yang Chendong arrived outside the city, he saw the tired but energetic soldiers. Good. Everyone fought well in this battle. Someone will calculate the military merits later. As for now, everyone should have a good night's rest. We will attack the city tomorrow morning. Yang Chendong's affirmative attitude made all the soldiers who participated in the battle excited and happy. Some of them were already thinking about how to perform well in the battle tomorrow. On the contrary, in Sangnu City, General Sang Wenla was dispirited. He originally thought that he had found the weakness of the mercenaries and saw the hope of victory. But who would have thought that everything would be reversed at night? Not only was the army heavily damaged, they could only wait in the city to be attacked. Tell the brothers to defend the city. We must be confident. In a few days, the king will send reinforcements. At that time, it will be time for us to counterattack. These words also attracted the approval of some of the captains and Kiliarchs. It seemed that the morale of the soldiers had also increased. Only Sang Wenla knew that the Lansang kingdom did not have any reinforcements. In the Battle of Wuha Forest, General La Ti died, and they lost 100,000 soldiers. In the Battle of Hanoi City, General Sai Shi died, and they lost 60,000 to 70,000 soldiers. Last night, they lost another battle and they lost nearly 100,000 soldiers. After consecutive defeats, the military strength of the Lansang kingdom had long been depleted. The 60,000 soldiers in his hands were the main force of the entire army. However, this main force was still surrounded by people, as if they would be eaten up at any time. These mercenaries were too scary. In the midst of trembling, the night finally passed. At dawn the next day, the mercenaries outside Sangnu City gathered and stood quietly outside the city, waiting for the sixth young master to give them the order to attack. Yang Chendong also changed into the golden marshal's uniform and walked over to a high ground outside the city. Victory in war was the result of the joint efforts of the generals and soldiers. In Yang Chendong's view, the strength of an army could be reflected from its external performance. It was roughly divided into 4 classes. The 4th class was a motley crew. They had no military discipline and robbed everywhere without a goal. Such an army would scatter as soon as they were attacked by an organized army. They were definitely not strong. The 3rd class army had a complete organizational structure. Their military formation was neat and uniform, but their fighting spirit was not high. Although they were stronger than the 4th class army, as long as they encountered an enemy with more fighting strength, they would definitely be defeated. They could not be considered strong in this aspect. 2nd class armies not only had a unified command system, but they were also well equipped. Their morale was also high. During the march, they would often shout slogans like, "Kill the enemy and serve the country." The soldiers were extremely brave. This class of army had momentum. They were not afraid of any enemy and could be called a powerful army. However, it was a pity that they were not the strongest. Compared to the strongest army, they still lacked a certain quality. This quality was silence. The strongest army was a silent army. This silence did not mean that the people in the army were mutes or did not speak. The so-called silence referred to a kind of momentum. Although there were tens of thousands of people, there was only one voice, one order, one goal, one step, one decision. In the end, to accomplish something, it would explode with unimaginable power. Lung Feng was the representative of the power of silence. When they moved, they were like thunder, shocking the world. When they were still, they were like statues, motionless and steady. With such an army and the powerful firearms provided by Dachang, there was no reason for them to lose or not win. At this moment, outside Mulberry Rage City, a dense mass of soldiers stood in the valley. They had different appearances, different military ranks, came from different places, and had different preferences, but they were all gathered in the same place, listening to the same voice, looking in the same direction. Not a single sparrow could be heard. This was the true meaning of silence, the most important quality of an army. This was a first-rate army. Such an army was invincible and invincible. In comparison, the army led by Sang Weng-la could not even be considered a second-class army. It was only a third-class army. Coupled with the defeat, the morale of the army had plummeted. There was no longer any possibility of stopping their advance. "I order." Yang Chendong's heroic voice shouted, "Attack." Chapter 585. Boom boom boom. As soon as he finished speaking, the 100mm mortars roared angrily. The shells flew out from the barrels and drew a beautiful arc in the sky as they blasted towards Sangnu City. At the same time, 5 rocket launchers whizzed towards the East City Gate. The seemingly sturdy East City Gate was instantly destroyed, revealing the figures of the Lansang soldiers guarding behind the gate. Charge! The 2 regiments of the Cold Vanguard, the 20 battalions of the auxiliary troops, and the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries roared out in unison. Under the earth-shattering artillery barrage, countless brave soldiers charged forward, their momentum shaking the heavens, and no one could stop them. With a plop, he fell onto the city tower. Sang Weng-la's eyes were filled with despair. "It's over, it's all over." Even the general had lost his confidence in victory. The soldiers below were even more intimidated by this momentum. The only thing they could do was to run around like headless flies and throw the weapons in their hands to the ground and surrender. The Lansang Kingdom had already used up all their strength in the Battle of Hanoi City. They had used all the fireproof guns and iron shields that they hurriedly produced. Although they had caused quite a bit of damage to the mercenaries, they had still lost in the end. It was also from that moment onwards that this kingdom was destined to walk down the path of defeat. The East City Gate was breached and countless mercenaries rushed into the city. What made them depressed was that they could not even put up a decent resistance. The city had changed hands and they had won. In the end, the enemy's general, Sang Weng-la, who was surrounded on the East City Tower, had no choice but to surrender with his subordinates. At this time, who would dare to resist the mercenaries? 6th Young Master, Sangnu City has been conquered. Sang Weng-la has surrendered and been captured. In the afternoon, the 2 regimental commanders of Lungfeng came to Yang Chendong to report the results of the battle. A city guarded by 60,000 soldiers only lasted for a few hours before it was breached and wiped out. It was not slow at all. Very good. The 2nd Regiment will stay behind to clean up the battlefield and tally the spoils. The 3rd Regiment will head towards Wanxiang City. Yang Chendong nodded his head in satisfaction. With the surrender and destruction of the Sangwala tribe, the entrance to the Lansang Kingdom was wide open. It was time to go straight to the center of the army. The bicycles were all transferred to the 3rd Regiment. Wu Sheng led the regiment of Cold Front straight to Wanxiang City with a face full of excitement. They would definitely create another glorious era. At this moment, Wanxiang City had yet to receive news of their defeat at the front line. As the capital of the country, it was still bustling with life, giving people the feeling that it was in a flourishing age. Any smart person would be able to feel a shadow looming over them under this flourishing age. It was like a huge beast that could devour people, opening its terrifying mouth at any time. In fact, the person who caused this shadow to appear was the representative of the civil officials, Imperial Preceptor Long Qi. After receiving the 2 million taels of silver from Yunk, Long Qi was already prepared to become a big merchant and live a comfortable life for the rest of his life. Right now, there was only one thing on his mind, which was to destroy the Lansang Kingdom's regime. Only in this way could he become a rich man. If you wanted to do great things, you would always need help. After careful consideration, Long Qi's gaze landed on a person called He Guang. He Guang, the vice-captain of the Lansang Kingdom's royal guards, was a rather capable general. It was because of his impressive abilities that he was not tolerated by others. This attracted the suppression of the captain of the royal guards, Emoda. And this suppression lasted for 10 years. Emoda only relied on the fact that he had an elder sister, who was the king's favorite concubine. Relying on this nepotism, he had always been arrogant. Sometimes, he even dared to offend the imperial preceptor, Long Qi, and nothing happened to him. Perhaps it was because Emoda had enemies everywhere that his ability to not unite with the other officials was valued by King Paiyasai. After all, as a force to protect his safety, he could not be used by others. Emoda was incomparably arrogant. Working under such a person, he naturally did things carefully. But this was not enough. As the saying goes, if you want to condemn someone, you can always find a reason to do so. In order to prevent others from deliberately making things difficult for him, these subordinates also needed to find some backing. Coincidentally, the person Higuang found was Imperial Preceptor Long Qi. However, this did not mean that Higuang would rely on Long Qi. As the vice-captain, he still had a lot of autonomy. It was just that the relationship between the two sides was very good, and they could help each other on many things. In this kind of environment, it was normal for Long Qi to set his goal on persuading Higuang. After discussing with Yunk, Long Qi was prepared to give it a try. This was why he invited Higuang to his residence with the excuse of inviting him to a banquet. The scale of the banquet was very small. When the tall and valiant Higuang entered the banquet hall, he only saw Imperial Preceptor Long Qi and a stranger. There was not even a servant to serve them. "Ha ha ha, Captain, he is here. Please take a seat. We're just waiting for you." After seeing Higuang appear, Long Qi laughed loudly and stood up, inviting him to sit down. Skylark, on the other hand, remained seated without the slightest intention of getting up. This attracted Higuang's attention and made him ponder deeply. This person was so unfamiliar. What kind of identity did he have to be so arrogant? It seemed like he did not even give face to the imperial preceptor. Looking at Long Qi, he did not seem angry at all. This was a little strange. Higuang had been the vice-captain of the king's guards for so many years, and he was used to enduring. Therefore, when he looked at Yunk sitting there, he only nodded politely as a greeting. Then, he sat down on the prepared chair. After the three of them sat down, Long Qi smiled at Higuang. "General He, the war at the front is going well. What are your thoughts on the battle at Sangnu City?" The hottest topic among the upper echelons of the Lansong Kingdom was the war at the front. Even the commoners on the streets could talk about it. As the vice-captain of the royal guards, how could Higuang not know? Therefore, after thinking for a while, he said, "There is General Sang Wenla at the front, and there is also the help of Jiaoji's famous General Fan Yuhai. With His Majesty's full support, victory is just around the corner." Higuang said these words very smoothly, as if he had said these words countless times. Hearing this, Long Qi just smiled. Suddenly, his face became very serious as he asked, "Is this really what the general is thinking?" Higuang did not know why Long Qi would ask such a question. Puzzled, he asked, "But what does the imperial preceptor mean?" "Nothing much. I just want to hear the general's thoughts. Speaking of which, there are no outsiders here. Why don't the general be more sincere and say what you want to say?" Long Qi said like a big bad wolf leading a little rabbit to his bowl. "No outsiders, my ass. Not to mention others, just the person sitting at the side. He did not even know his name. How could he not be considered an outsider?" Of course, these were all thoughts in Higuang's heart. He could not say it out loud. Therefore he laughed and said, "But what does the imperial preceptor think about this?" Long Qi seemed to have known that Higuang would ask this question. He said with a serious face, "Our army will lose." "Oh, what?" Higuang originally thought that the other party would say some high-sounding words like he did, but he did not expect such an answer. This was completely out of his expectations, and it also made Higuang stunned on the spot. His mouth was wide open, and it seemed like it was more than enough to stuff an egg into it. "What? General He, did you not hear me clearly? The imperial preceptor said that our army will lose. It won't be long before the news of our defeat reaches the capital. I'm afraid that at that time, the Lansong Kingdom will not be safe." Long Qi had a compassionate look on his face, as though he was an eminent monk who had attained the Tao. "How is this possible?" Higuang was really shocked. Although he was the vice-captain of the king's captain and knew the combat power of his own soldiers, They had the advantage in numbers. In addition, they had prepared for a long time. How could they lose so easily? Even if they lost 1 or 2 battles, it would not easily affect the safety of the capital. Also, Long Qi was the imperial preceptor. How could he say something like this that boosted the morale of others and destroyed his own prestige? He Guang could not understand this. Knowing that He Guang wouldn't believe him, Long Qi smiled again. Then he pointed to Yunk, who was sitting there and drinking tea, and said, "Come General He, let me introduce you. This is Special Envoy Yun sent by the Great Ming Dynasty's Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Great Ming Duke of Loyalty and Courage? Mercenary? As if he thought that he did not hear clearly, He Guang looked at Yunk and asked with a face full of doubt. At the same time, his expression was constantly changing. "Yes, the Special Envoy greets General He." Yun Ke finally opened his mouth to speak. He spoke the standard language of the Great Ming Dynasty, but it sounded like a thunderclap in He Guang's mind. What was going on? He actually saw the enemy's special envoy in the imperial preceptor's residence. This person did not go to the palace but appeared here. Could it be that he secretly came to contact the imperial preceptor? What did the imperial preceptor want to do? Betray the country? Thinking of this, He Guang suddenly stood up from the chair and pulled out the sword on his body. Imperial preceptor, this person appeared here without His Majesty's permission. He must be an enemy spy. Please allow me to take him down. Take him down? Take him to who? Whether it was Long Qi or Skylark, they didn't seem to care about He Guang's intense reaction. It was as if they didn't see the angry atmosphere and just sat there calmly. "Of course it's to His Majesty," He Guang naturally replied. "What happens after you hand it to His Majesty? Are you going to hand me over to His Majesty for punishment?" As he spoke, Long Qi's face became gloomy. In the end, he was the imperial preceptor of a country. Once he was angry, he would be imposing without being angry. At this moment, He Guang was also intimidated by this imposing manner. Then, he suddenly remembered that this was the imperial preceptor's residence. Since Special Envoy Yin could sit there calmly and unhurriedly, it was clear that he had obtained the imperial preceptor's approval. Then, why would he capture someone here? This time, He Guang came alone and did not bring a single subordinate. If the other party turned hostile, would he be able to walk out of the imperial preceptor's residence? Chapter 586. Feeling that he was in danger, in order to protect himself, He Guang raised his sword and said to Long Qi, "State teacher, you must have been deceived, right? Don't worry, I will capture this person now and send him to His Majesty. When the time comes, I will explain the situation to His Majesty and guarantee that state teacher will be fine." At this time, He Guang actually wanted to provoke. When Yunk and Long Qi saw this, they couldn't help but laugh. After a burst of laughter, Long Qi said, "You came to plead for mercy for state teacher. Haha, do you really have that much face? Don't you know that you can't even protect yourself?" "State teacher, what do you mean?" He Guang's face was puzzled. "Wait a minute, put down the sword first. You make people feel uncomfortable looking at you." Without waiting for state teacher to answer the question, Yunk opened his mouth. "Why should I put down the sword just because you told me to?" He Guang looked at Yunk with a sneer. "AI, why do you have to do this?" Yunk shook his head and reached for his waist to take out a pistol with a silencer. After gently unlocking the safety, he casually fired a shot. Pooh! The sound was effectively blocked, but the bullet was not blocked. It flew out of the barrel and hit the sword. At such a close distance, the powerful force made He Guang, who was not prepared, have to let go of the sword. With a clanking sound, the sword fell to the ground, scaring He Guang and making him break out in a cold sweat. He had long heard that the mercenaries had powerful guns, but he never had the chance to see it. Now that he finally saw it, it was indeed powerful. But after a moment of distraction, He Guang wanted to lower his head to pick up the sword, but he saw the carpet under his feet suddenly shake. Another bullet hit his feet. "General He, seeing that you are a hero, I want to have a good talk with you. If you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, then I do not mind that the next bullet will hit your body. You will undoubtedly die. Yang's voice spread in the banquet hall. He Guang's body stood there as if his acupoints were pressed. He did not dare to move an inch. Sure enough, it was a powerful firearm that could fire a second bullet at any time. Did that mean that it could fire a third or fourth bullet? Just as He Guang was pondering over this problem, the voice of State Preceptor Long Qi sounded in his ears. All right, General, he is not an outsider. Come and sit down to talk. He Guang didn't know if the next bullet would hit him, so he might as well sit down and listen to what the other party had to say before making a decision. When he finally sat down, Grand Preceptor Long Qi said to him calmly, General He, you are also a talent of your generation. Don't you know that a great disaster is about to befall you? Please enlighten me, Imperial Tutor. He Guang really didn't understand why he was about to face a disaster. Sigh, once the front line is defeated, what will His Majesty decide? I'm sure he'll use the power of the King's Guards to counterattack. Who do you think is the leader of this group? It couldn't be that idiot Emoda himself, right? His Majesty probably wouldn't allow that. But when a general leads an army, can you guarantee victory? The hundreds of thousands of people in front of you are no match for the mercenaries. What can you do with the few people in your hands? If this isn't a great disaster, then what is? This. He Guang really wanted to deny all of this, but he knew that what the State Preceptor said was true. Emoda's ability was limited, and His Majesty knew this as well. However, considering that this person was still very obedient, it was naturally not bad to raise him as a loyal dog. However, such a dog could not be released to bite people, because he did not have the ability to do so. At that time, it would be inevitable for him, the vice-captain, to lead the army. To lead the army was naturally something that every general hoped to do. However, just as the State Preceptor said, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in front of him were no match for the mercenaries. How many men could he bring out? The entire King's Guards only had 20,000 people. How could they defeat the mercenaries? If that wasn't courting death, then what was? However, at that time, he would have to do so regardless of whether he was willing or not. If he agreed, he would die on the battlefield. If he didn't agree, he would very likely be taken down by Emoda. No matter what the outcome was, there wouldn't be a good ending. Layers of cold sweat began to flow out of He Guang's head. Previously, he didn't think that the army in front of him would be defeated, so he didn't consider these things. But now that it was pointed out, he realized that the situation was already so dangerous. Of course, the so-called danger would only appear when the army in front of him was completely defeated. If they didn't lose, if it was only a small defeat, then all of what the State Preceptor said wouldn't happen, and he wouldn't be in danger. He Guang was still deep in thought when Skylark, who was sitting there playing with a pistol in his hand, spoke. General He, after the State Preceptor's recommendation, we found that you are indeed a character. Therefore, the Duke of Loyalty said that if you are willing to surrender, he will use you heavily. You know General Hong Jin of Yunnan Province, which is the original Jiaoji country, right? In the past, he was just a deputy general with a low status. However, he was chosen by the Duke of Loyalty and has become the current general of Yunnan Province, leading 30,000 soldiers. If General He is willing, the future General Lan Song will be you. And you can also lead 30,000 soldiers. This way, you won't have to die, and you can also become a real general. Isn't that beautiful? He Guang knew about Hong Jin's matter. Although some people were afraid that he was a traitor, who knew how many people envied him in private? At least because of this person, the Hong family didn't suffer heavy losses. Not only that, but Hong Jin's status also rose. It was said that the Duke of Loyalty gave him an annual salary of 100,000 taels of silver. Who knew how many people envied him? It should be explained here that Yang Chendong implemented a high salary policy to raise honest people. Once someone was appointed, they would enjoy a high annual salary. It was to ensure that the person appointed could live a good life, or at least not have to worry about living. Moreover, once they reached a certain age and needed to retire, they would receive a large monthly salary, which was called a pension. This kind of treatment would only end when the person who was enjoying it died. In other words, once someone was appointed as an official by the Duke of Loyalty, They wouldn't have to worry about food and drink for the rest of their life. Of course, if someone was still dissatisfied and wanted to be corrupt, then sorry, once it was found out, the punishment would be quite severe. There were already clear rules that anyone who was found to be corrupt over 10,000 taels of silver would be killed without mercy. No matter what kind of achievements they had in the past, the result would be the same. The Duke of Loyalty said that merits couldn't offset demerits. After all, they didn't have to worry about food and drink, and even arrange for their old age. If they were still dissatisfied, then they deserved to be killed. Back to the main topic. He Guang was one of the people who envied Hong Jin in private. Not only did he envy Hong Jin's ability to lead troops and become a true general, but he also envied Hong Jin's treatment. For example, he was the vice captain of the King's Guards, and could be considered a fourth-rank general. However, in reality, his monthly salary was only 80 taels of silver, which was less than 1,000 taels of silver a year. Although it wasn't a problem to support a family, it was just a casual life. He didn't have the ability to do anything else, and even if he wanted to be more comfortable, he couldn't do it. Now that his role model was in front of him, and his treatment was 100 times better than his own, and his power was also much greater. At this moment, it was impossible to say that he wasn't moved at all, although he wasn't a greedy person, or else Yunk wouldn't have talked to him in this way. Who would refuse a better life? At this moment, He Guang became a lot more silent, and had a hesitant appearance. General, he doesn't need to answer so early. How about this? You can go back first and think about it carefully. If the front lines are really defeated and you are sent out as a general, then it won't be too late to make a decision at that time. Yunk didn't seem to be in a hurry to force He Guang to answer, and instead said very generously, "Let me go." He Guang was also shocked at this moment. He didn't agree to anything, and on the contrary, he knew about Yunk's existence. Wasn't the other party afraid that he would sell him out and come back with troops to capture him? As if he saw through He Guang's thoughts, Yunk laughed and said, "General, he is a smart person. How can you do something stupid? Besides, even if you really hand me over to your king, what benefits will you get? There is still Maud above you, so you won't be able to stand out. On the other hand, if you sell me out, will the loyal guild forgive you? You have to know that we have a lot of these guns in the mercenary army. If we casually use one on someone, I guarantee that you will be completely dead, and no one will even know who did it." After tempting and threatening, Yunk waved his hand. "Okay, General, he can leave." I'm really leaving." Slowly standing up, He Guang decided to leave first. There were some things that he needed to think about carefully. Standing up, He Guang prepared to leave with large strides, but Yunk's voice suddenly sounded behind him. "Wait." "Sure enough, he still isn't going to let me go?" He Guang sighed and slowly turned around. "Take your sword with you. Also, don't look like you have lost your soul. Anyone who sees you will have doubts." Yunk pointed at the sword on the ground and said very casually, "Oh." He Guang's heart that had been raised up finally calmed down. He picked up the sword and bowed, then turned around and left. He Guang really left, leaving behind State Teacher Long Qi, who asked with lingering fear, "Special Envoy Yin, he really won't tell on us? Why don't we leave now?" State Teacher, don't worry. As long as he isn't stupid, he won't tell on us. There is no need for us to leave. Does State Teacher really think that I am the only one who came to Wanxiang City?" Yunk laughed very confidently. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."